welcome. We're doing a podcast, which is exciting. I've always wanted a podcast. I feel like it's my opportunity to be a small dictator in some way and have everybody be forced to listen to my inner thoughts, which is a frightening thought. But I'd like to thank you for joining me very much. And yeah, we're doing a podcast.
We are. We're doing a podcast. It's not just one. Actually, we're doing a few, aren't we?
Six.
So this is a series of 6 podcasts, which is really great. Really looking forward to hearing from so many people and actually saying that. So what types of people are we going to be speaking to? And yeah, do some name drops. Why not?
Okay. So for context, and you're a fan of picking your audience.
Absolutely.
I've sort of listened to that, but I recognise there's 2 audiences I want to sort of connect with in particular, and they're connected. They're connected through the food we eat. So there's my Leprino farmers. I say they're mine. I don't own them, but they're guys and girls, or men and ladies that I work with very, very closely, and they have a place in my heart. And you know, I wanted to be able to sort of inform them of some of the things that are coming their way, and sort of introduce them to some of the people who are sort of steering some of that, and the solutions that are out there to help us, because change is coming. I mean, change is a constant in farming, but it's really coming at quite a pace. So there's that target audience. So we'll hear from individuals across the supply chain who are steering that change, offering solutions to help farmers. At the other end, there's always that risk that some of the people steering that change, the supply chain end, as we refer to them often as the retailers, and it's not just retailers, there's all sorts of people, but bless them, they do get a bit of a stick beating. It's also important to let them know what is happening on farm, and some of them they also need that awareness, I think, of the wonderful stuff that farmers are actively engaging in to do the right thing, to make sure that, you know, we've got beautiful food that tastes good, that is affordable, but most importantly, it's sustainable, and sustainable in the truest phrase. And that all sounds very rosy, but we're also going to have a few quite frank conversations, and we've 1 or 2, particularly some of our farmers, who've been deliberately picked to be honest with us. And we're not just going to talk about all the wonderful things we could do. We're going to be quite frank about some of the barriers to getting them done.
Yep.
And some of the opportunities if we get it right.
Yep.
So we're going to have a bit of a balance.
Yeah, it's the what works versus the what doesn't work, and the why that goes with it.
Yeah, so we've got some good household names within there. So if I'm name dropping, we've got a couple of really good household names in the world of pizza, because obviously we make amazing mozzarella. So we've got Pizza Hut restaurants, we've got Dominos, we've got not a customer of ours, but a sort of membership organisation we're part of, where we're trying to sort of understand how the supply chain is responding to sort of climate change and broader sustainability. So a lady called Kate, who runs the Future Food Movement. So they're going to talk about broader sustainability trend and what is really driving the need to change. You know, is it the consumer? Because some people say it is, some people say it isn't. We've also, like I said, we've got 4 of our farmers, so a range of systems, from autumn block to spring block to all year round calving, large farms, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, and sort of smaller farms. So we've got a representative sort of group there. And then in terms of solutions, we've got, well, there's 3 big feed companies and representatives from. So we've got Winstay, we've got Trow, we've got Massey Feeds. We've got Timac Agro, which is very exciting because we're starting to talk about soil and some of that real sort of trump cards that agriculture can play, but when will we be ready to play them, because they are real assets in sort of reputation and just the good that farmers are doing. We've got Silgen Animal Health, who have got some really interesting novel products, really easy to utilise but quite impactful. We're obviously going to talk about some difficult topics, but soy is going to creep in here or there.
Yep.
And then we're going to talk about some stuff which I think is a bit sexy, to be honest with you, and some people should strap themselves in right now. Others might disagree with me. I don't know many that think lean management is a sexy topic, but we're going to dedicate an entire episode to the sexiness that is lean management.
Lean management. That's great.
Yeah.
Everything that comes with it.
Peaks.
Yeah. So we've sort of said, we've set out the scene of the why. What we haven't done, Ben, and while we know each other, is we haven't told everybody else who we are. So that's probably something we should do, and sort of how this came about. So just in case anybody who is listening, Ben, doesn't actually know you, has met you, has heard you, give yourself a 10-second intro. There's a challenge.
10-second intro. So yeah, so I work for Leprino Foods as the sustainability manager. My job is to produce sustainable mozzarella from farm to customer.
And I'm Helen Brookes, the engagement director for the UK Agri-Tech Centre.
So obviously we know each other from past careers at AHDB. Absolutely. Where we sort of supported knowledge exchange for farmers. I, like yourself, are great believers in sort of communicating to farms and supporting sort of change rather than forcing change or just expecting it. It's about helping people along the way, because nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, do you know what, I give up. We're all trying what I do today. Yeah, we're all trying our best, but sometimes we need support. So we're both great believers in that. Leprino, we're a cheese manufacturer. We don't have a huge presence in terms of sort of the digital world and knowledge exchange, but we recognise that you guys at CL do. So you've got this knowledge platform, you've got a great network, and I think Leprino were conscious that our farmers are doing some amazing things. Lots of other milk processors and other supply chain farmers are also doing some good stuff. But there's value in sharing. So it's about collaboration. So I want to share what we're doing so that everybody knows that obviously we're awesome, but generally speaking that, there's these great solutions out there and other people can be aware of them.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. That's where we're going, and that's where we're heading over the next 6 episodes. So on to episode 1. So episode 1 is titled Why Change? And really, why change? Who have we got discussing that today?
So if we start very much about sort of those who are driving change and understanding the why, obviously Simon Sinek, he's all about let's start with why. And let's face it, there's no point doing anything unless you know why you're doing it. So really we're starting at the supply chain end, because if we're being really honest, change is being done to farmers. Let's be very frank. Let's not try and kid the audience at the moment. That's what's happening, particularly from a sustainability point of view. There's legislation coming their way. There's the reputational risks. There's the pressures of sort of, the need to change because of lots of different reasons. The aim today really is to discuss what those are. What are the drivers? What is the rate of change? Who's really pushing for it? And sort of what does that mean? Does it mean that actually we've got a bit of time to sort of get a handle on this? Should we be a bit panicked and sort of, is there a fire being lit under our collective, bums to sort of get moving? And so for that, we've got a couple of big pizza companies, or big names in the world of pizza, both of which have committed to science-based targets. So these are targets that are based on all of the collective science around climate change. And they've used that to model what we'd have to do as individual businesses, not individual people, but individual businesses, to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. So below the point where we start to see fairly seismic, even catastrophic changes in weather patterns and disease shifts and various other bits and pieces. So they could be considered proactive in their approach at the moment, but they're also quite honest in the fact that they don't have the answers. And I think that's really important to start the dialogue, is be honest with each other. Yeah. So there are 2 of our customers that are absolutely proactive, but they're honest. And then we've also got Kate. So Kate from Future Food Movement, their aim is to educate on food and health, and really start to look at and sustainability, and really start to support businesses in what they need to do to drive action. And they've got some incredible people there. So they talk to nutritionists, and they talk to sort of change leaders and thought leaders, which are wonderful terms. But also they have a lot of farmer representatives. So their goal is also to get farmers and supply chain to talk, because they recognise it can't be done in isolation. So they're sort of middle persons between either end of the supply chain, much like we are trying to help change. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think we should just crack on and introduce the people we're talking to today. So we have representatives from Future Farm Movements, from Hearts with Smarts, which is the Pizza Hut restaurants, and Dominos Global. So let's crack on and get the series rolling.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much, Steve and Keris, for joining us on the podcast today. Steve, can I ask you first just to introduce yourself, your role at the Hearts with Smarts group, and explain a little bit about who the group are and what you do.
Yeah, very happy to do so. So hi everyone, I'm Steve Packer. I am the Chief Infrastructure and Sustainability Officer for the Heart with Smart Group, which probably means you're wondering what the hell that means. So the Heart with Smart Group, you might not have heard of, but you will know the brands we operate. So we're the sole franchise operator of Pizza Hut restaurants in the UK. So we operate 148 Pizza Hut restaurants. We're the only operator of Pizza Hut restaurants in the UK. And we are separately owned and operated versus the Pizza Hut delivery side of the business. So we just represent the restaurant side. We used to be called Pizza Hut UK Limited, and then about 3 or 4 years ago, we signed up a franchise deal with Itsu, the Japanese brand, sushi brand. And it was a bit strange ordering salmon and saying we're Pizza Hut. So we kind of changed the group name to the Heart with Smart Group. So that's the reason behind the group. In terms of the role that I have, I'm one of the owner directors of the business. So we're privately owned, which does impact how we think and why we do things. And I look after several things, including both supply chain and sustainability. So very pleased to be here today.
Brilliant, thanks, Stephen. Keris, can I ask you to introduce yourself and obviously your role within the Heart Smart Group as well?
My name is Keris Jenkins-Lowe and I'm Sustainability Manager at the Heart with Smart Group. So I report into Steve and I effectively am the one-woman team looking after sustainability within the company. So everything from carbon to bins and recycling and everything in between all sits under me. Our main focus on sustainability is really around kind of decarbonisation and reducing our carbon footprint. We use that as a bit of an iceberg indicator, to steal a phrase from livestock, for whether we're doing the right thing in the sustainability space is really focusing on that carbon piece. My background is very much agricultural and supply chains. I used to work for a big orange retailer in their agriculture team and did a bit of sustainability consulting in there as well. So it's quite a good synergy for me in terms of where the high areas of our footprint are and my areas of interest as well. So yeah, really excited to be here today.
Marika from DPE. Marika, could you just sort of introduce yourself to the podcast and maybe give an overview of your role within the company and some of the goals of the company, especially from a sustainability point of view?
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you for having me, Helen. So my name is Marika Stegmeijer. I'm Dominos Pizza Enterprises, in short, DPE's Group Chief ESG Officer. I've been in this role close to 3 years now, and I always say I have the honor to be the first one in this role. But to me, it's just part of the journey that we've been on for a much longer time. But at some point, we agreed that it's important to have somebody who's heading this up globally and who's driving the work, our strategy and vision on this piece and the goals globally. So that's my role. Dominos Pizza Enterprises is, as we call it, a master franchisee of the Dominos brand. So we're the largest international branch, so to say, in fact, of Dominos globally. Our headquarters are based in Australia. And we operate currently across 12 markets. It's an APAC region. So it's Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Cambodia. And then they have a European region. It's the Benelux, France, and Germany. Those are our 12 markets.
Brilliant. Welcome, Kate, to the podcast. Kate Corley, could you just introduce yourself to those who are listening, who you are and what your role is within the industry?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, guys. Yes, my name's Kate and I am the founder of Veris Strategies and also Future Food Movement. Veris is a food systems and sustainability consultancy for the food industry, primarily working within the retail supply chain. And then through our kind of 20 years of work within the food industry, back in January 2022, we set up Future Food Movement, which we basically did because we identified a huge barrier that we were experiencing to kind of change within these businesses, in that there is a big skills gap across every single level of the food industry, from kind of factory floor, shop floor, right through to board level. And this skills gap around sustainability and climate was effectively manifesting actually in a lack of confidence to act. Most people do want to get involved, they do want to do the right thing, but they don't understand the big issues or think it's not for them. So we have created a membership community that is inclusive and available to anyone working in food to come along, learn, tap into all of our brilliant experts that we work with, join all of our events, access e-learns, live masterclasses, upskilling learning programs, and actually just be part of a brilliant peer-to-peer network and community, which Ben is also part of. And the idea is that we just want to facilitate really important conversations and bring in as many diverse voices as possible to kind of help guide and direct a better future of food. And one of the things that we recently launched as part of Future Food Movement, which Ben is part of, is our Farmers Advisory Board. We also have a Youth Advisory Board, two really, really important stakeholders in the future of food, but actually the voices aren't loud enough or not being listened to. So that's another kind of key aspect of Future Food Movement that we're trying to do and convene.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a real experience for the members actually being part of the movement. So Ben, you're obviously part of, as Kate said, you're part of the sort of new advisory forum. How else is Leprino involved with the movement itself?
So I've been a sort of lone member, I suppose, without sort of the full Leprino weight behind. But for me, to be really honest, I sort of came in from a very heavy agriculture farm side. What I lacked was that broader, and Kate called out that network there and that coming together of people at the top end of the supply chain. So I saw it as a great opportunity to not only learn a lot more, but also develop my own network. And for that, it's been brilliant, meeting groups of people from within clients that Leprino sort of support and supply on a sort of a mission that we share together has been really, really powerful. So I've been in it 2 years now. I think I've been a sort of member. We're currently looking to join as a corporate member, so we're having those conversations now. In fact, I've got to sort the PO out because we are going to join. It's finance always takes a little bit of time. So we're committed to that, and I think we're committed because of the fact that we recognise there's change, and as Kate said, it's important to have that diverse voices, particularly from the farm up, because we quite often hear from the top down. There's wants, there's drives, there's ambitions, but from the farm up is important. And I suppose actually, if we go back to Kate now, it's worth sort of asking, the big question, I suppose, Kate. You've got all of these voices from all of these different companies, and we're not going to ask you to name them all because they are some pretty hefty household names, but the general feeling of change being needed, what's driving that amongst customers? What are they saying? This is the reason we feel we have to change.
I think there's a couple of I would say pressure points coming in. I think still customers, there is an expectation to be performing to a certain level. Particularly for working within the retail supply chain, there are just certain standards now that you have to adhere to. But I think for those that are part of the capital markets, there's investor pressure as well, actually. And that's definitely kind of driving action. I think the increase in disclosures and reporting is really starting to drive action, and the transparency that is starting to force. And I think that has definitely kind of enforced businesses to look at their data and how they can report and kind of effectively be compliant. But actually, I think the biggest kind of lever is actually the cultural piece, both from an internal employee perspective. I think particularly with the younger generation and attracting and retaining talent, people want to work for businesses that are doing the right thing. So I think that we are starting to see the internal cultural piece, but also from an external cultural piece, this topic of climate and the impact of the food system is now quite mainstream and across a lot of the media and the kind of exposés and scrutiny that is delivering. I think that is driving it as well. So it's been quite interesting. I would say before COVID, we didn't have this cultural piece, but we have now got this cultural piece that we're definitely trying to kind of drive and support from an employee and customer perspective.
Why do you think this conversation around sustainable food is so important to the business but also the industry?
So to the business, I think it's literally our bread and butter is obviously serving food and serving our guests across the country, and we can't do that without sustainable food production and a sustainable food supply chain. And we hear the word sustainable thrown around a lot, and I think people's minds go straight to the environment and sustainability on that respect. But to us, sustainability is really about the bigger picture, and it's about true resilience and being able to do the right thing today and the right thing tomorrow, in terms of being able to trade today, but also being able to do ethically the right thing today and tomorrow. So yeah, without kind of a true resilient and sustainable food production system, we won't have a business. So, you know, from a business side of things, I think that's the important. I think there's then the bigger picture as to whether we're ethically doing the right thing, which I think, Steve, you'll be able to talk to a lot more as one of the owners of the company. But for us, it is really, you know, we're guardians of this food system that we eat from, that we also sell food from. So it's really important for us to do the right thing by that system to enable ourselves to continue, I guess, to live as a society.
Yeah. So Steve, from that sort of ethical business point of view, maybe some of your reasons around the conversation being so required and needed right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why I mentioned the ownership structure. I think this is what makes us a bit different, because that's generally where this is coming from. So we're a privately owned business. There's 6 of us on the management team. We're management owned, have been now for quite a while. And the management team have been around for a long time. So I've been in the business now for 28 years. I'm not the longest serving member of the management team at all. There's a lot of people longer service than I have. And I've been looking after our sustainability agenda now for about 8 or 9 years. And we started this because we wanted to do business the right way. We want to be a good business. So we want to make some money. We want to have some fun along the way. We want to provide great service and great experience of all our guests day in, day out. But we also want to do all that in the right way and be able to sleep at night and look back on our careers and go, we've done it properly. So we've been doing a lot of things kind of behind the scenes without anybody kind of talking about it. And actually, you know, we've been accused of green hushing over the last couple of years, which was a new phrase that I didn't know about until 2021. So it's great. So, you know, we genuinely want to do this things in the right way. So sustainability for us has been about how can we run a very good business across the board. So how do we look after our teams? How do we look after our customers? How do we look after, you know, our environment? How do we look after our suppliers, the farmers, etc., etc. So, and as Kerry says, we're stewards of this business for the moment. We want to leave it in a better shape than we found it. I think the resilience piece has come more into play over the last couple of years. I think, you know, you've just got to look at what's happening across the world right now. And last couple of years, in terms of weather shocks and droughts, and with my supply chain hat on, I've started to become equally, if not more, concerned around not just how do we stop these problems getting any worse, because the answer is I'm not sure, you know, we can do what we can do, but the reality is Pizza Hut restaurants and Heart Smart Group on its own is not going to solve climate change. We're just not. And we have to be prepared for the fact that there will be climate shocks that will be impacting upon our supply chains. So where do I get my tomatoes from for our tomato concentrate next time there's a massive drought in Spain? You know, that's potentially an existential threat to our business, and that's tomato sauce we can't sell pizzas. So we started this off from a very kind of ethical, moral, you know, wanting to do the right thing perspective. Now there's a bit more of a hard business edge to it as well, which is, okay, how do we be a bit selfish and make sure we're protecting our business needs for the future, because this is going to cause some challenges for further down the line.
Brilliant. And in terms of I suppose some of those sustainability goals of the organisation, are you able to just give us maybe some top lines on where are you heading and what are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's important to also mention that when I joined DP in this role, it was clear to us, as we're also a listed company, so we have a large investor community that they also have expectations. There was a clear demand to do the right thing, because it's the right thing to do. It's one of our values, but also to look at science-based targets. Because, you know, in a field where there's not much guidance or agreement globally, at least we have the science-based targets, and it's based on science, and we believe in science. So we said, okay, you know, we hear this feedback. We also feel what we want to be part of the solution. And we know that global warming is, and we'll talk about that in detail, I'm sure, but there's a huge impact on the world as such, but also on us as a business. So we felt we want to make sure that what we do limits impact on global warming to a 1.5 degrees pathway. So we've committed to science-based targets. We've gone through a whole long journey, I would say, first committing to these targets, but then also setting these targets, and they've now been validated about a half a year ago. So we aim to achieve net zero by 2050. We have a couple of, as they call, scope 1, 2, and 3 goals, but we summarize those in short, that we aim for a 65% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per product sold in 2030 compared to a 2020 baseline. So that's our intermediate threshold to get to 2050.
Yep.
And as part of that, we also committed to zero deforestation by the end of 2025. Especially the deforestation part is part of what they currently, what the Science Based Target Initiative has released as flag guidance, so forest, land and agriculture. science keeps on evolving and we all keep on learning in this field, especially. So we felt like, okay, to do the right thing means to also take this new guidance into account. And I'm proud to share that we've been one of the first 10 companies. So we're a pilot company for the latest guidance on FLAG from the Science Based Targets initiative. So these targets have been validated and approved by the Science Based Targets initiative. It's an independent organization established by among others, the United Nations and World Wide Fund for Nature, WWF. So independent experts have reviewed them, and now it's our job to make this happen, to take action. I can talk for hours about that, but I'll leave it to you to ask me the questions you want to know the answer to.
Yeah, well, we'll pick up on that then. So, I mean, we've talked about SBTI and FLAG, and for some of our farmers, that might not be a massively familiar thing, but to a lot of our customers now, a huge number of customers are looking to SBTI and sort of are aligning their targets and goals. I suppose the obvious question perhaps to a farmer is rather than just what sort of SBTI is, and we can perhaps cover that in a bit, but why now? What is driving this need to sort of make sure we are all aligned with sort of net zero goals and various other bits? You know, we've got sort of people saying it's consumers, we've got sort of various other bits and pieces out there. What do you feel is sort of driving this massive need for change now?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of reasons. One is for sure. I mean, we've all seen what happened last summer here in Europe. We had floods, we had droughts, we had thunderstorms, we had hail the size of golf balls. We've seen heat waves, extreme heat waves. So I think it's clear to many people, even though those people who are not too convinced about climate change, that it is happening, and it's happening now, and it's not happening in the future. So it's visible. So what I can see is people's opinions start to change. So I do expect that customer expectations will change, if not today, at least in the future. We've seen it already.
It's coming.
It's coming for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I've mentioned that, you know, as a listed company, investors have expectations, rightly so. And they also, quite simply, they are forward-looking, especially our long-term investors. They want to make sure that what they invest in, and often it's also people's pensions, that are at stake. So so how do you explain to the people who trusted you with their pension, what are you doing to secure that their investment is still sustainable in the future? This means that you're asking, again, rightly so, critical questions to those companies that you're invested in. This is also the other element related to this. It's about a business risk, and this is to like discussions I have internally. It's a new way of looking at risks. So I've been in a similar role now for 8 years. So at my previous employer, had a similar role, also a company in the food sector. I was also the first one to have that role, and the company had been around for 70 years, 70 years. Looking at things in a traditional way, very open and willing to change, but still we had discussions about risks, and it's like we always have risks as a business, but these are like different type of risks, and it's not just environmental risks. There's also a huge part of like human rights risks in your value chain that you have to take and address seriously, because otherwise, like especially if you're a well-known brand, I mean, obviously you don't want to face any human rights risk in your value chain or environmental risk, because that's just not okay. But also there's a big risk to your reputation as a brand, and especially if you're a well-known brand. And these days you see that civil society actors, NGOs, are way more active, and holding companies accountable, as they should. I mean, so it also keeps us on our toes, but in a good way, right? These changing expectations. So discussions I have internally are really about also, okay, looking at the risks as a business. You're looking at things, especially, so we talk a lot internally about franchisee profitability. And one of our challenges is how do you get franchisees on board? Because the first thing they will tell you is like, this sounds like it's going to cost us extra money. But it's actually about, making sure, looking at the risks in your supply chain, thinking about climate change. This is about, are you able at the end of the day to deliver that pizza to your customer? Because if there's like a huge climate risk in your supply chain, that you're not like that you're facing droughts and you are not prepared to do this, then there's a risk of not having the right ingredients on time in your supply chain to deliver them to your franchisees and ultimately, deliver the food to your customer.
So is it
Yeah,
then about viability as much as sustainability for the business?
Absolutely. For me, it's also about investing in your business and to make it like a resilient supply chain in this case.
Absolutely.
It's about resilience. That's the word I often use. So for us, it's investing in people who've put the money in our company to make sure that they have a sustainable, return on their investment. It's for the franchisees to ensure that they are still able to deliver the products they want to their customer according to the quality and the speed and affordability as well. Because these prices will only increase, in my view. Food risk. I mean, we've seen the increases over the last year and a half. Food prices. I think they will only increase more and more because we have to deal with so many changes in climate. And there's also the element, as I mentioned, the customers' expectations will change. And because of the changes we literally see in the environment, changes in legislation, that's not a big one. I mean, governments are, putting more pressure on companies and raising expectations, increasing the need for transparency. So in my view, this all combined leads to just in a couple of years, I would expect a different way of looking at companies, what the expectations are. And also, like, as a customer, do I still want to buy products from this company? Because I've heard that they are not doing the right thing or they're at risk there. They just ignore or not acknowledge climate change, or they don't care about human rights abuses in their value chain. All these kinds of elements. So it's the investors, it's the franchisees, it's the customer part, it's the civil society part, but also your own people. Well, that's the last one. Because our ESG work consists of 5 pillars, and people is always the one we usually start with first, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, especially younger people, they want to work for a company that stands for something, that stands for issues that concern the environment, but also the social issues. So in order to attract the right talent, there's another reason why you want to make sure that your company can explain to its stakeholders that indeed you do the right thing, and not just say you have great targets, but actually also take action on these targets.
And that comes down to impact, doesn't it? I think you're right. The workforce today is much more aware of the impact that they can make as a company, but also personally as well, because that drives motivation and that enables change. So I suppose the next question is really around what change are DPE making to enable sort of that flow of opportunity to de-risk.
Yeah. So when I started 3 years ago, my first question was, of course, what has been done so far to get to know the company, And one of the things I saw was missing is to have like a common goal, a vision on ESG. Because at the end of the day, you can have great targets, but if you cannot rally everybody behind this, it's not going to happen. Now, my job is basically to make sure that whatever we try to achieve with ESG is part of everybody's job at some point. This is a long journey, I tell you, with many battles along the way.
Absolutely.
Because you're not an expert in every field. It's just not possible. So you try to create ownership while you do this, starting with a vision that should not be my vision, but it should be a vision that is a shared vision, basically, of every employee and ideally external stakeholders as well. So this is how we created that vision. So as part of our vision, we say we aim for a better slice for everyone by 2030.
Nice.
So
nice. That's cute.
Fitting, right? It's a pizza business. So we aim for a better slice for everyone by 2030. I always translate this as a measurable positive impact for our key stakeholders, internal and external. We now have a company mission to be the dominant sustainable quick service restaurant in every market in which we operate. So that's the broader company statement. And then we believe in a better slice for everyone is our internal goal on ESG, or as we call it, Dominos for Good. So we're trying to bring people on that journey internally, where we say, okay, this is why we're doing it. Because also somebody once asked me, like, okay, so what is it you want to achieve? Because I don't think you can rally anyone behind the fact that your company has a negative impact. That's not, it's not, I mean, it's not motivating.
Everybody come on the sinking ship.
I was like, come on, it's not the future. I was also looking at legislation. I think not just legislation, but I think what my interpretation is of the European legislation is that, and I fully believe in that, how can your company explain that what you're doing actually has an added value for society and for the environment? So the discussion was also, so you don't want to be negative, but you also don't want to be neutral, because you cannot really rally people behind it. Just, we're going to do the bare minimum, but we're going to do it. So again, I think this is where I believe our vision is aligned with what also now the future expectation is on what society expects from companies. It's like, how do you justify that the resources you use from the planet are being used in a way that for sure doesn't harm the planet, but actually it ultimately has a positive impact. And that's a tough one. I'm not going to pretend we're there yet, but personally I like to believe this is where every company should move towards. And it's also not just the environment as an example, but it's also like, how do you, to your point, Helen, like with an employee, how do you justify that that person has put so many hours of work into this business? What did it deliver? Like every employee, I believe, maybe there are exceptions, probably there are, but I think most people want to contribute to something positive and want to feel what they do matters.
I think we should come back to us young people, or the youths as we like to be known. I'm down with the trumpets, Helen. You don't have to. I can see you laughing.
I can absolutely
but
tell everyone.
picking up. I mean, you obviously mentioned legislation driving massive change, and we have heard that actually from our other guests. But the sort of, I've lost my track of thought now. It's because I was so happy that I could claim to be a youth, because I realised with my face radio, no one can actually see me. But picking up on that culture and that shift, perhaps in the wider public image, there's so much now, isn't there, out there? Sort of, we see it from BBC News being fairly mainstream. Sort of, there's regular pieces through to a range of publications, and of course social media. Do you think, actually, because of that huge zeitgeist, there you go, throwing a good word there, actually the need to educate now is probably even more important?
I think so, yes. And actually, we've got a really, really great broad demographic of people within the community, and shall I say the older generation, who are often, leading businesses. I think they are acutely aware of the legacy piece here as well, which is something we really love to explore. And I think it's two points to that. One is, I think, and the media's done a great role of this, I think we all realise we are the last generation that can actually do something about this now. So I think there's that aspect that they can't ignore, that they want, from a reputational perspective, to be the business leaders to kind of, face into this, make the difference. But I also think, and it is a gross generalisation because not everybody's got kids, but those that do have kids are also feeling the pressure from their family and friends now, actually. And I think the younger generation are so much more informed and educated about this, and just expect businesses to be doing this, that I think that's another kind of positive pressure, kind of a positive tipping point, which is great to see.
So while the education and the skills piece is absolutely needed, I think sometimes what we do miss is the ongoing support element. So we deliver the education, we deliver the knowledge, we tell people what it is, we give them the 101, and we say, this is how you can move on, and here are all your choices, and crack on. And then it's that additional support piece. How are you seeing some of that causing a challenge, and where are the opportunities?
Yeah, well, it's exactly why we have set up Future Food Movement as a community, and our kind of definition around upskilling is you can impart the information and the education, but actually that's almost the easy bit. It's then going into delivery mode, which is really, really hard. Yeah, and the many blocks that they're going to face, and that stakeholder management piece, and the kind of emotion that you put into this. And I think it's quite interesting, actually. We've got, obviously, our community, which I'm really proud of, is probably 80% non-sustainability people. The rest and we've got about 20% kind of sustainability experts, but it's actually the sustainability experts who we're working quite hard to kind of support and give them the emotional resilience to keep going, because they are so informed, and they're often lone rangers, or they've got very small teams in-house to some of these super tankers. They can see what's coming, and I think the frustration and the passion that you put into this, that can be very, very challenging. And I think, I know lots and lots of in-house sustainability people that are feeling quite burnt out, because the size of the job and the challenge is just bloody huge. And I think, that kind of emotional resilience and building that support network is so important as part of upskilling and kind of making sure that we can, kind of keep supporting, keep going once you've got that education piece.
Yeah, keep going. And I think you saying about the size of some businesses, I mean, take retail, for example, with the, the supermarkets, people presume that their sustainability and their agricultural teams are huge. They're not. They're, they're very small in comparison. We're talking about a few people. So like you say, burnout is real, and not everyone can be an expert at everything. So the opportunity to support and develop knowledge and create, like Ben said earlier, create the networks where you can actually lean on, and just go, look, I don't know. What do you think about this? That at the moment, I think is so important.
Yeah, massively important. And I was actually talking about this with some of the community the other day. What we're actually trying to do is like the ultimate change management program of the food system. And when you think these big super tankers, these big corporates are looking at 2, 3, 4 heads of sustainability, head of agri, to do that change management, it's really unfair. It's really unfair.
I think it's quite reassuring to sort of any farmers listening to the podcast that sort of, one of your primary goals is to keep buying key ingredients, of which I'm hoping that obviously mozzarella is definitely one of them.
Yeah, it's hard to make pizza without it, right?
Well, there'll be some that would suggest, but obviously I would firmly believe that mozzarella is king. But I think, it's lovely to hear that you guys are, this is the right thing to do, and that's a major driver. There's obviously and the cynics would say, if there's not another driver, they'd suspect you're fibbing. So, the real honesty there about sort of this is a business need. Farmers will also hear a lot about sort of, consumers' intentions around buying is largely or increasingly being driven by sort of the need to be sustainable. And this is often sold as one of the real reasons that farmers should sort of strive for sustainability principles and bits and bobs. I suppose there's 2 questions. And Steve, if I start with yourself, do you think that consumers are having much drive here? And dare I say it, if they are having much drive here, do you think that's still the primary, or would that ever be a primary reason to do it, or do you think there's probably other things that will always be more important?
I think I'll answer that question backwards. So if this was the number one thing in consumers' minds, and every consumer decision was taken with a sustainability lens on it, then if we don't give the consumer what they need, then every business doesn't have a business going forward. When this becomes critical to consumers, every business that wants to sell anything, which is every business, is going to have to take note of this. Sadly and quite simply, I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the general consumer does care. I don't necessarily think consumers all the time know exactly what caring means and what the most important things are. We still get questions about plastic straws, for example, as being one of the the biggest problems in society, and it's really not. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not even on our top 50 issues. So I think education all around for producers, for middle processors, for retailers, for brands, for consumers, I think is critically important. And I think certainly in the hospitality space, I think there are some consumers that very much care about this and do make buying decisions based upon their ethics and their morals and their needs. I think in our part of the market, I think it's relatively small. We hear occasionally, but if you look at the mass market and where people go for their food and drink, I don't necessarily believe they're making those decisions because they're doing it from a sustainability perspective. I think that's becoming more prevalent. I hope it becomes more prevalent. I think the more pressure we get from consumers, I think the faster the market will start to move. I actually think in our sector, most of the brands that I know in this sector are moving faster than their consumers are asking them to. And in most cases, I think, and from talking to customers, I think they just assume we're doing the right thing. And if they find out we're not, and we get caught up in some sort of scandal for buying badly or buying a really horrific piece of product, then they'll stop coming to us. I don't think they're necessarily proactively coming to us because we do things in a certain way. But I do hope that changes over time, because I think forward-looking brands that are trying to do the right thing could and should benefit from that.
And Karis, that probably tracks across, and obviously we shouldn't bring in former employers as big and orange as they were, but in your experience across the food sector, shall we say, does that sort of ring true a little bit as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think the education piece is a really big one. Like, sustainability and farming is a massive and complex beast that, even those of us that are lucky enough to work in the industry would not say we are experts in, even though it's our day to day. And, a customer who's got, whether it's, a couple of hours with us or a few seconds at a retail shelf, they have a limited amount of time to make decisions based on what's in front of them. And they see price, they see quality and taste, and that might be it before they get on to having a conversation with their friends. So, it's a difficult thing to communicate across, even in the time that we do have. And I don't think that customers necessarily know what they are, what some of those important questions are that they should be asking, because they want to go for the simple thing. Hence, the plastic straw. You look for something simple and easy, and you go with that as your marker. So I think that's kind of maybe the job for us and our peers in the industry, is how do we do that right thing and talk about it in the right way, but it maybe just does become part of our general day to day, as Steve said, and they just expect we're doing the right thing because we are.
Yeah. I think there's probably two responsibilities and two opportunities for brands like us. I think one is to help educate customers and ourselves. By the way, as Kerry says, we're not experts in this. We're getting, I'm consciously incompetent now on some of these things. But I think we need to educate ourselves and our customers along the way. I think that's a real opportunity and responsibility for us. But I think also is customers are always going to want what they want, right? So this thing about having ethical customers will still want to get in their cars, get on a plane, go on a holiday, eat meat, eat cheese, etc., etc. And despite what some of the experts say, well, that's not going to work for society. You're not going to change the behaviours of 8 billion people in time. We're just not. So therefore have to give them better versions of the things that they're always going to want to buy. So we're a pizza company. We're always going to be pizza's always going to be the biggest part of our menu, no matter what else we want to do. And a big part of that is going to be the cheese and the dough and tomato concentrate. So how do we make sure we give them the best versions of that we possibly can get? So this isn't about saying go and buy a pizza that's got no cheese or a pizza that's got plant-based cheese on it, because actually the vast majority of our customers are still telling us they want real dairy cheese. So, okay, what's the best version of dairy cheese we can get? Because if that's what they want, how can we give them the best version of that and therefore reduce our impact on the environment around us?
We've got a lot of drivers, legislation, consumers in time, the fact that it's the right thing to do. There definitely feels a need, and you've talked about 2030, which is 7 years away. So there's a need for change, but it's incredibly rapid change, which I think is always uncomfortable, isn't it? I mean, change can be bad enough, but change at real pace is tough. So I suppose if we're going to get there, if we're going to get to 2030, which absolutely we have to avoid the worsening of what we've seen so far, what's the role of the farmer? So looking right down almost from the top of the supply chain to sort of that primary production, where did DP or yourself see sort of farmers playing a part?
I think maybe just to take one step back, looking at our targets, I mean, also to clarify, so we've gone through the whole process and we've done our baseline measurement. We set the targets, they are approved. We know what our biggest impact area is, and it's in our supply chain. So about 97% is what they call in scope 3, which is mostly a supply chain. 50% is literally of that scope 3 is purchased goods, and mostly let's say 90% is food. And we know that dairy and animal-based proteins account for probably roughly near to 40% of the total impact of our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a lot. So in other words, if you really want to contribute our impact to global warming to 1.5 degrees pathway, we definitely have to take action there. And we understand that we obviously cannot do this alone. I would never pretend, nor would my colleagues, to say that we have all the knowledge in this field. You need to work with experts. You need to work with partners who do have this knowledge. So this is also why we've initiated, as one of the first biggest pieces of supplier engagement, our Dominos Dairy Initiative together with Leprino. to really target the one thing people will understand that a pizza company has to address is the dairy part. We know it's also one of our main impact areas. So we believe in partnerships together with our suppliers, but also with their suppliers. As your point, Ben, I mean, this is about collaborating in a supply chain for a common goal, and where the farmers can help us. I mean, we like to hear from them. What are the things you are doing? What are the things you care about? What are the things you think are feasible? It's my impression that once was asked this question at a seminar. They were asking me, what is your view on farmers? Are they willing to change? And I said, well, I also come from a farmer's family myself, but I think if you're a true farmer at heart, you care about nature, you care about your animals, you care about doing the right thing. I don't believe there's maybe some exceptions, but I think most farmers, I mean, these often have been family businesses for so many generations, so you care about your business, and you want to make sure that you live in close collaboration or in partnership with nature. So yeah, you do things and you see things and possibilities or maybe limitations that we cannot see as a customer further down the supply chain. And I also think that people often don't know what farmers are already doing. I learned a lot through my engagement with Ben from Leprino and others, where farmers are trying to do so many things, but outside of maybe that part of supply chain, not many people know about that. So one of the things we also discussed as a Dominos Dairy Initiative is looking at what we can do as a brand owner. How good would it be that we connect like the customer with the farmer? People often don't even know where their food comes from these days. So that's the win-win, where you can educate educate the customer on what's actually really happening, where food comes from and why we're doing things and how we're trying to make this more sustainable and ethical. And for the farmer to be more visible to the customer, they also get the recognition of the work they're doing, but maybe also be honest about some things that cannot be changed overnight, because we all know indeed 7 years, it's short, but we also know that things cannot change overnight.
Yep.
But we need to take certain steps to get somewhere.
Yeah.
And this is why engagement is important. And it's about the key actors in the supply chain, but it's also about what we discussed as part of our Dominos Dairy Initiative. It's about inviting other experts to the table to challenge us on things like animal welfare, but also deforestation, regenerative agriculture, all these topics. Now we can use our collective knowledge to really drive an ethical and sustainable dairy supply chain in this case.
And you talked about obviously sort of science and research driving your sort of goals and targets, etc. But from the Dominos Dairy Initiative, is there that sort of test and trial ethos within that group, within that service that you're looking to develop?
Well, I think this pretty much accounts to everything related to ESG and sustainability. I mean, I always a bit suspicious if people tell me that they have the solution. I think we're all learning here. I think the best you can do, you're probably going to fail like 100 times in what you try to do, but it's about the attitude and mindset to give it a try another time and then
Absolutely.
see that was actually the right thing to do.
And how can you learn from the time before?
How can you, indeed, that's it. To me, it's really about like a mindset, attitude, but also real firm belief and that this is the right thing to do. Because it's the right thing for your business, it's the right thing for the environment, it's the right thing for ultimately a customer who wants to enjoy like a great pizza, but doesn't want to worry about what we call food without regret.
Yes.
It's like indulgence, affordable, high quality, delivered to your door fast as we can, and it's responsible, but also still an ethical and sustainable product.
I'm just going to pick up one piece in particular. It was really good to hear, and I think it will be good for sort of our Leprino suppliers, our farmer base, that desire for education to move up the supply chain, because I think it can feel a little bit when you're on farm that lots of people are telling you to do stuff and they're not always as willing to sort of listen. So it's great that you have, you know, in terms of sort of DPE and getting out and about, and I suppose I sort of know some of this because we've had the conversations, but as an ESG team, what sort of things do you want to do over the sort of the coming months and years to sort of have that education? Is it about just having farmers come to you? Do you want to go to farmers? What how do you see that growing?
For me, it's mostly about how can we translate these targets, these abstract things, into concrete actions, and to learn about things that work and don't work. So if it requires, and we've done this in the past, where we visit farms and literally see like what's happening, and if you do this like in a sustainable way or non-sustainable way, what are the consequences, what is the impact, and like, because as I said, I mean, we don't think we're the experts here. I mean, in some areas we are, obviously we have to, but some other areas obviously we aren't. So I don't want to push for things that are, I mean, we would challenge, and we're challenging Leprino, but you know, we will challenge that actions are taken in the right ones. But it's also say that, you know, you don't want to push for things that are just not realistic, feasible. I mean, we also care about farmers that they still have a sustainable business themselves. I mean, they still have to secure their own livelihood, so that should be a given. But also, I mean, we spoke about then data fatigue, or maybe I used a different word, but so data is key in our ESG world, because this is where you see that how you can understand if you're actually making impact, because that's what we all want. But we don't want to burden our farmers with all kinds of extra requests, so that at the end of the day, they're doing the admin for 3 days a week instead of doing the real work. So this is where they also need to help us. And now we're asking also Leprino, like, what can we do to get to like a stage where you better understand what the impact is of certain actions proven by data, without overburdening people in your supply chain with all kinds of extra request. I don't have the answer to that, but it's like what my belief is, or view is on this.
Yeah, less data collection, but significantly better quality is definitely the mantra, isn't it? It's not recording everything for recording's sake, but it's absolutely. And I think we see the fact that, I mean, you pointed out there, it's about sort of making sure that we are doing the right thing and we're moving towards those targets we set. But of course, it's going back to, as you said before, there is an expectation and a need to prove that we've done it, because otherwise we risk not having anyone to sell product to.
No, absolutely. I think it's for farmers important to understand that it's, you know, if these requests come to them, it's not because we don't trust them or as we want to overburden them with extra work. It's just that we really want to understand, are we focusing on the right things here? You know, we are being held accountable as we should. Now, science-based targets, the expectation is that you at least annually report on your progress. So we want to demonstrate that we actually indeed have taken the right actions, and together with Leprino, we're asking them like for the right data to show that we've not only set those targets, but we're actually making a real impact here.
I was going to say from the data side of view as well, like Ben said, it's about getting good quality data, not all the data for everything, but good quality data. Quality. But from the farmer's point of view, it's about how can they utilize that data as well. So where is the value for the farmer, for Leprino, for DPE, and you know, for others? It's about making sure that there is value, and that's how you're going to get potentially you know, more buy-in and more engagement through that, if they see the value throughout the supply chain, not just that it's for DPE or not just for it's for Leprino or whatever. So that side of you, and so that's why it's great that you're listening to your suppliers and their suppliers to make sure that opportunity comes through as well, rather than it just being seen as another thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. That's a very good point. I must say that there's one phrase I often use, that ultimately we aim to achieve a better slice for everyone. You know, from the farmers who grow our ingredients, to our franchisees who make and deliver our meals, to our customers who enjoy our pizza. So it's definitely the farmers are an important stakeholder, and it's very valuable. It should be. We should do it in a way that indeed it has this added value, because it can actually really help them if you find a way with data and these insights. To me, transparency, traceability are really some key words in all of what we do. that will help us a lot, all of us, collective partnership, to get where we need to be.
It's funny you mentioned change management. I hadn't even thought of this coming in to this conversation, but I was with a company the other day, really good feed company, and myself, their director of sustainability, their sustainability manager, and that's it in their company. And they're probably one of the biggest feed suppliers, certainly into us and locally, and they've got lots of other businesses as well. And it is the two of them, which is twice more than I currently have, although we're very lucky to be employing a very talented individual coming in. But they were chatting away and they asked me sort of this question, sort of, when you came in, did you have a budget? We sort of drifted off onto sort of more personal procedural bits and pieces. And I said, no, we didn't. And we worked this through and bits and bobs. And they're like, oh, how did you get the company to commit? And I very, perhaps there was almost too much ego in it. I have to admit to that. But it was one of those where sort of we're quite casual and we were chit-chatting back. And I went, oh, I sort of turned around and said, this is what it will cost. And if you don't give it me, I'll leave, type thing. And I sort of, on the drive home, I instantly regretted the moment I said the comment, but I regretted it more and more on the way home. And I realised that that's not what I did at all. There was a huge change management program, and I actually wrote it out, a full change management strategy for the business. And I showed it to a couple of the key directors, or certain elements of it, not all of it, to be honest, but certain elements of it. But this whole long program that took 6 months to develop personal leverage, to develop the political skill, to sort of actually sort of pivot a business which has a really small core of senior leaders and actually can be incredibly agile. But it still took all of that. And yet I myself, as a sustainability person, had told another one, I just gave it big time, didn't I?
Yeah.
And you realise the importance of that collaboration. And I did feel really ashamed. And in the end, I shared what I did, like the whole document. There it is. Here's the piece. But I just want to pick up on a bit there. I think that speaks to the resilience. And the other bit I found challenging for me is as that sustainability person, you're between a rock and a hard place. You're between the hard place of a C-suite, which has a business to run.
Yeah.
And particularly when it's running well, don't mess with that formula. This is what we do. And then, of course, you've got this sort of broader series of people that you're trying to influence to change on the business's behalf, who also then have their concerns. And we were talking beforehand, a lot of our farmers are absolutely right to be concerned about what's going on and the consequence. But in any sort of social movement, you start to get those extremes of opinion. And we are starting to see these sort of, oh, well, it's all made up, the full climate denial, it's a WEF Davos conspiracy theory and they're out to get us. There is, across almost all I've noticed of the Future Farm movement members, there is a guiding principle. They've signed up to SBTI. Why is that SBTI so important? And why is that SBTI? It's not a conspiracy theory, is it?
Make sure that everyone knows what an SBTI is.
Yes, so that is
for the audience.
Science-based target initiatives, which gives some hint at the answer, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I would say it's probably the most well-known, effectively voluntary standard. And I think if we're honest, it's because that's what the retailers have grabbed hold of, and really what the retailers do, the rest of the industry follows. And it's probably, whether there's many critics of it, but fundamentally it has moved the industry, which is a good thing. And it is holding businesses accountable because they are publicly committing to it. And at some point, I would like to think there will be some recourse for no progress against it, and people can't just hide behind a verified science-based target initiative, which is where I think a lot of the industry is, because they don't quite understand how they're going to rapidly decarbonise and deliver against it. But at least we have something. I am an optimist, and I think it's a positive flag, and it gives people a framework and confidence to work to.
And that's it.
Not being perfect.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's a science-based framework, so it is countless millions of research hours and actual on-the-ground proper science, not just best guesses and fingers in the air that says this is where we are, this is how we're changing, and this is your glide path. And it's a consistent glide path.
Yes.
So all of those that saying I need to be here by then or here by then compared to where I started from, it's the same path. So even if you say, oh, well, maybe it's not 100%, or you start to criticize sort of the methodology itself, it's a systemic error. We're all on the same glide path, and we're all still pulling towards the same point. And I think that's it, isn't it? Almost all of the Future Food movement members are either committing to, and we can argue about the ethics of I've committed to it, therefore I've done my job. That's probably a whole nother conversation. But where they are committing to, at least they're committing to a consistent glide path based on science. It's not just a conspiracy, is it?
Yeah,
that builds the community, doesn't it? That builds the community. That builds the confidence that you've talked about, Kate. And I absolutely believe that we have to build community. We have to build confidence to enable people to feel like they can do something, even if it's set out step 1, step 2, step 3. They still need to feel that they are able to do it.
Yeah, and I think they all need feeling that they're all following that direction of travel. Everyone's going to have their unique journeys because of their company culture and you know how they operate, but broadly everybody needs to be going in that direction of travel. And I think I could be wrong here, probably might need to fact check, but I'm pretty sure globally, from an industry perspective, the global food industry are the biggest sector that have got science-based targets, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
That's really, it's really positive. And I'm sure, so I mean, no matter which consumer data organization, without naming them all, you listen to, you know, the top 3 things that consumers want is the best price, the best quality, and the best availability. And then you start looking at the ethics, and whether it be sustainability, environment, animal health and welfare, all of those types of things. Yeah. But I'm sure from your company, it's, you know, the price, the quality, and the availability are massive drivers for you as well.
Absolutely, they have to be, right. So you can't be green if you're in the red. It's a phrase we use quite a lot as well. So we have to make sure that we are sustainable as a business by still being here in 5 years' time. There's no point us having the most sustainable low carbon footprint pizza if we've got to set for £500 and no one buys it. We'll go bust in 6 months' time and everyone exists. So we have to work within those commercial constraints. Absolutely. I think there's also a difference between what the consumer research tells you and what people actually do. I'm very, very cynical about guest research. If we believed in all the research, we'd never voted for Brexit. Trump would never have won in America, etc., etc. So people will say the right thing on surveys quite often and then go and do something different in the real world. And I'm not saying that's because they're deliberately trying to not do the right thing. But the reality is we all have all sorts of constraints we're working on every single day. I think consumers are trying to do their best. I think it's our job as brands, not their job as consumers, to give the best version of the products. You know, there will always be some consumers that will actively seek out the best version, whatever best looks like for them. But ideally, for all the brands in the UK were just providing the best versions of themselves, consumers wouldn't have to make a choice, right? Because they can know wherever they go, they can walk into a restaurant, walk into a retail, and they'll get a product that's produced in a better way, better for the environment, better for animal welfare, etc., etc. So I think consumers bear some responsibility. I think legislators bear some responsibility they're not taking at the moment. But I think as brands, we also shoulder a huge amount of responsibility in this space. It's down to us.
Yeah.
So
Keris, you were talking about both of you were talking about education, which is a real key area that obviously, you know, this podcast is aiming to educate and deliver knowledge. But in terms of that, you know, collaboration is key when it comes to education. So actually just wanting to explore maybe some of those collaborative opportunities that you're exploring at the moment, to take those small steps, because we always want to do the giant leap, but taking the plastic straw analogy, you know, that's a small step, but people grabbed onto it, and it's still something that they're talking about now. So what are those potential small steps that you're looking at through collaboration to enable change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think collaboration is one of the biggest things for us, and you know, a lot of my time is spent in really exciting conversations and building relationships, because you know, even as Pizza Hut, as you know, Pizza Hut restaurants in the UK, we think of ourselves as, you know, we've got some restaurants, we're a fairly big size, but actually we are a drop in the ocean in terms of some of these challenges that we're looking at. So we're not going to be able to solve any of these on our own. Across, you know, our restaurants or across even as an industry. Like, we have to collaborate massively. For us within the industry, we're founding members of something called the Zero Carbon Forum, which is sort of a UK hospitality led forum working together towards net zero at pace. And you've got everyone in there, really. There's like massive numbers of people and growing every day, which is super exciting. And as part of that, we have sort of our own company roadmaps and sort of climate action plans that we can work on, but also a huge number of collaborative working groups and action groups that we're involved in. So, you know, just to think of a few, you know, I'm involved in the dairy working group within Zero Carbon Forum. We have one on regenerative agriculture, which was sort of trying to understand the lay of the land there, and one on engaging with our suppliers as well. And what we're able to do in those groups is, I guess, one is just to upskill ourselves and share knowledge, which hopefully some of the listeners of this podcast will be really knowledgeable about farming and food, and because they're farmers. But within our industry, we're not all massively up to date with what's going on in farming, because we're not farmers, we're hospitality. And so by sharing some of that insight as to what goes on farm, we're able to kind of come from a place of education as we're trying to drive some of this change through our own businesses, and then also collaborate on sort of actions and communications, to your point, Helen, that we can then put out to our guests and our customers. So I guess that's the Carbon Forum piece. We're also members of RAP across the UK, and we have sort of the Quartile commitment that we're signed up to, which I think, they do a lot of work on kind of external communications as well. And that helps us as a business, because it almost gives us a license to talk about some of the things that we want to talk about, because we know that there's an official party line, whether it comes from Carbon Forum or from RAP. We're comfortable then pushing that out, and it kind of negates that fear that we're going to be greenwashing or greenhushing. It kind of gives us that ability to speak a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'd absolutely echo that. I think one of the things that I feel most privileged about is the position we play within the sector. So I think about those organisations Kerry just mentioned. So on the Zero Carbon Forum, I personally sit on the operations board of the Carbon Forum. So that's a brand-led group of about 8 or 9 brands now that help drive the whole sector forward together. And with RAP, I sit on the steering committee of the Quartile 2030 agreement. In fact, we're the only hospitality member to sit on that steering committee. So that's a massive opportunity and responsibility, I think, to kind of share knowledge and to gain knowledge. I'd love to claim we're creative geniuses. We've come up with all these ways to solve climate change. Almost every single thing we've ever done in this space is an idea that's come from someone else. So it's critical in this space to talk. Absolutely, exactly. Sometimes we've enhanced ideas and built on it, etc. But I'm not going to say this. Absolutely made it our own, but I'm not going to say that we've come up with all these amazing things. We've learned from others, so it's critically important to keep learning from others. As Kerry's mentioned, it's a very complicated space. It's changing all the time. The science is improving all the time. Opinions are changing all the time. Consumer landscape changing all the time. The economic landscape is definitely changing all the time, as is the political one. So you've got to keep on top of the change, and the best way to do that, especially when you're a relatively small brand, and as Kerry said, we are the entire team in this space. Despite the fact one of the largest brands in the UK, you've got to talk to others. I think it's also important, and I'm not sure that every single brand would say this in the UK, but we do not see this as a competitive space. We're not competing for our slice of the environment to save Heart with Smart, and everyone else can go to hell in a handbasket. Our job here is to make things better for everybody. So we don't have any issues whatsoever. And actually, we see it as a responsibility to learn as quickly as we can and share that knowledge with others. We're not going to sit on ideas we find. We're going to share that and talk as quickly as we can across the sector. So Kerry's mentioned about the Dairy Working Group, which is, we're here to talk about cheese quite a lot. We are very open to sharing with other members of the Carbon Forum anything we find out about cheese, because the quicker we can improve our information, the quicker we can improve theirs, the better, right? We shouldn't be going out solving how to have good poultry. The guys that run the chicken company should do that, and they should share the information with us. We shouldn't be solving how to have great beef burgers or great beef protein. The guys that run the burger company should go and do that and share that with us. We're one of the biggest buyers of cheese in the country as a pizza company. We should be helping solve the cheese and dairy issue and solve that challenge with other people as well. So I genuinely don't think this is a competitive space. And I know that's not how we act in our business on a day-to-day basis.
It's a good point. Everything you've said there, you've talked about pace, you've talked about non-competitiveness, you talk about an industry that's needing to change fast, like frighteningly fast. So your own targets, sort of in terms of climate pieces at a top level, and Keris, obviously you're sort of in charge of driving those, and obviously Steve, you have to sign them off and whatnot. What is the framework that you're working to, and where do your targets sit? What is the pace of change? Is it quantifiable, as in you've got this much time and you've got to be here?
Well, it is, and it's not our targets. We don't set them ourselves. So they've been set by the Science Based Target Initiative. I keep saying to people, these are not our targets. The planet and the science tells us what we need to do, and it's as simple as that. So we're in a very fortunate position where Keris has done an amazing job this year, and we've had our science-based targets validated. So we've now got very measurable, time-bound, scarily deep and broad targets to hit over the next kind of 20 years. So yeah.
And you say, 20 years actually sounds like quite and for some people they might think, look, 20 years is 20 years. I'll wait the next 18, 19 of them and it'll be fine. But we know that the tick time in the ag industry is sort of 40 to 50 years for any sizable change. So that's already a long way off. But Are there sort of shorter term, intermediate sort of targets that are quantified under SBTI for you guys to hit?
So we have our net zero target, as Steve said, that's validated is to 2040, which is in line with the Zero Carbon Forum's industry roadmap. I think the limit to net zero targets is actually 2050, but we've sort of pulled it forward because we believe that we can push things more to that pace. But we also have near-term targets alongside that, which is to 2030, which, you know, given we've got what 6 weeks left of this year, is starting to feel very, very close that we're nearly in 2024. And you know, we're talking, you know, it's not like a 20% reduction by 2030, it's 74% of our internal operational emissions reduced by 2030. And 100% renewable energy that we already have, but continuing to source that every year. And then 55% of our scope 3 emissions by 2030. Now, obviously, a huge amount of that scope 3 sits within the food that we buy. So you're talking massive industry change to try and, you know, carve out that 55% reduction in the next 6 years. And as you say, lead times in agriculture are pretty long. And that is not because people don't want to change or don't have the drive. It's because we work with the limitations of a biological system that is a pretty slow thing to turn. So yeah, big scary numbers.
I think the other thing that's a challenge in this space is I think not every organisation, some have and some haven't, has got their head around the agricultural bit and the non-agricultural bit. So, you know, 96% of our emissions are not within our direct control. So 4% of our emissions in scope 1, 0 scope 2, 96% scope 3. Now we can control some of that to some extent with menu design, etc., etc. But as I mentioned, we're a pizza company, so it's a bit hard not to sell pizzas. So we're having to work with our supply chain to say, look, we've got to buy your products. We need you to reduce your footprint because we're importing that. And we've had some conversations with some suppliers that are doing absolutely brilliant things, and we're very fortunate one of us on this call. So thank you, Ben and the team at Leprino, doing some amazing stuff.
Welcome.
You know, on what happens to be for us our biggest part of our carbon footprint, which is very, very helpful. We've got other suppliers that are starting to think it through, and others that really haven't even thought about it yet. And some of the ones that are thinking about it are still thinking about, well, I've got to work out where I get the heat from my factory, or what vehicles do I drive my products around in. They're not necessarily thinking about where does the raw ingredient come from, what's happening in the fields. And the problem with that is you've literally got to plant those seeds years ahead of time before you see a benefit, right? And that's the challenge, is some of these timescales seem like they're way in the future. And actually, everybody in the UK, if they wanted to, could go and sign a green energy contract tomorrow with their energy provider and go green on their energy consumption. Everybody could do that. It costs a bit of money and you've got to make a phone call, but it's not difficult. It's not expensive to do that. Changing where your wheat comes from for your flour, or where your milk comes from for your cheese, or how that's produced, etc., that's the stuff that takes time. And the most forward-thinking organisations I see in the UK are really starting to work that through with their agricultural partners, and we're trying to kind of play catch up and do the same thing, because those things that ship takes a long time to turn. So
I should be careful, because obviously we are one of those suppliers, hence why we're having this conversation. You've been kind enough to donate your time, but I don't want to make it sound like we've got this wonderful roadmap and various other bits and pieces, but you have been kind enough to engage sort of along the supply chain, and it doesn't have to be Leprino specific examples, but are there bits and pieces where you guys, maybe in the sort of pursuit of education of yourselves and sort of the consumer, bits and pieces, you've actively engaged, you found particular value in that engagement, sort of with farmers, and there's stuff that you think probably we should do more of, and are you happy to give some examples, or do you think there's a hell of a lot more that can be done yet?
Yes to both.
Brilliant. Moving on.
Yes, there's examples, but we're scraping the top of the iceberg, as Kerry's mentioned earlier. So I think from a chief perspective, we're very fortunate in that we've got one supplier, and you guys are very engaged in the process, and our supply chain is quite short. It's us, it's you guys, it's the dairy farmers, and because you guys are committed and the farmers are all contract you directly, that end-to-end value chain conversation can happen quite easily. In some of our supply chains, it's so incredibly complicated. We haven't even got a clue just yet exactly where all our product comes from, and exactly what down to farm level, for example.
Yes.
So those conversations.
It moves around the planet. But...
Absolutely, exactly, and we certainly don't have it for every single item. So another good example would be we talked earlier about wheat. We've had lots of very good conversations with wheat farmers, but we've no idea, and some of their wheat may well make its way into the flour that ends up in our dough, but we don't know, because that chain of custody you know, you've got the farmers growing the wheat, it gets dumped in a grain trader, they take it to the millers give it out to various products. Some of that grain probably doesn't end up in our product, but it's not full chain of custody. So to try and you know, have a full value chain intervention, you've got to have us at one that wants to make a change. You've got to have the farmers farming things in a certain way. You've got to have the traders and the producers and the flour millers and the dough manufacturers, and getting all those people lined up is always quite difficult, especially when you know, we're a very large brand. We require lots and lots of volume of this stuff. So we're buying something like 250 tons a month of wheat for our dough. Okay, sorry, 250 tons of flour. I don't know how many tons of wheat is required to produce the flour. So that's not coming from one wheat farm, right? And even if it was, we're not fully in control of that. So you've got to get lots of people at every step of the chain involved and engaged and wanting to do the right thing. And sometimes that takes quite a lot of time. Now, if we were a small independent pizzeria, you know, Steve's Pizza Company, I could go and find one farmer that's got produced farm and regeneratively produced wheat and go and buy their flour and make that pizza dough myself in my restaurant. That's not how we work as a large brand. So on the one hand, there's a privilege of being a large organisation that has scale and buying power and the ability that when we do make a change, it has a big impact. But those ships do not turn quickly. Those chains are difficult to unravel and make change all across the board.
But then does that not strengthen your mantra earlier that sort of this is part of your moral obligation as a large brand? Maybe you shouldn't be finding that one farmer who's doing that one thing. If you're steering for all consumers, surely part of your moral obligation is to, you know, better is a measure across every supplier coming in.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. We nailed that. That was easy. we've just solved everything, Steve.
Yeah. I mean, if we take that example, let's follow that wheat analogy for a second, right? So if we could find, and are having conversations live right now with flour producers that buy directly from regeneratively farmed wheat farmers, and we can't ever make all of our dough all made with that flour, A, because there isn't enough in the country being produced, and B, the chain of custody would be almost impossible to manage. However, if we can just encourage and put some of our volume that way and say, look, we don't need to be able to measure this, we just need to know that some of the flour we are purchasing that goes into the silos that make some of our dough, if that's coming from some of these farms, and we can encourage more of that, even if we can't claim it or take credit for it, it's still doing the right thing, right?
Yeah.
And we're doing that in a scale and where that has a massive benefit that would happily have a look at that and have a go at it.
It's almost like providing the market for doing the right thing. You provide the market for doing the right thing, and more people will come along on the journey.
Yes, but the complicated thing is that it's not just the market, because sometimes the supply is there and the demand is there, but the supply and the demand don't meet in the middle, because you've got 5 or 6 other steps in the middle of that. So we've spoken to lots of farmers that want to farm in a certain way. I know lots of brands in the sector that want to buy in a certain way, but we don't buy from the farmers.
Yeah.
Now we buy from someone that buys from someone that buys from someone that buys from someone that then buys from the farmers. So you've got 6 steps in the chain, and every step in the chain, you get this snowball or spider web, whatever you want to call it.
Harmony.
Yeah, right, exactly, and that's where it gets complicated.
Just heighten the need for communication, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For you to be able to communicate, and maybe Kerry, you can expand on some of the ways that you are communicating with your suppliers and your customers to actually sort of nudge people along this direction and into the next steps that you are hoping for them to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's communication is key. And I wouldn't sit here and say we have all the answers and we're trying to communicate those and educate it. We're trying to find out the answer. We're trying to bring people on that journey. So we obviously have great engagement with, some of our suppliers that, Ben, you're on the call today. Obviously, we talk about this all the time. But we're really trying to kind of bring all of our suppliers, whatever stage they are on the journey, into this way of thinking. So I have sustainability specific conversations with some of our suppliers on a regular basis, but we're also trying to empower kind of, I guess, the owners of those relationships and those contracts within our business, so our supply chain team and our procurement function, to have those conversations as part of how we source anyway. So it's not sustainability and sourcing, it's sustainable sourcing. And as we've said, it's a complicated area. There's people that are already trying to think about price and quality and contract timings and everything else, and then you're adding in another dimension. So what we're really trying to do is kind of set up a framework that empowers those teams to kind of understand the conversations they need to have, and kind of bring it into the bigger picture. So it's not just our sustainability teams talking, it's all the teams talking at once. And I guess what we're talking about is how can we, make the carbon, how can we make the journey like add momentum, I guess, to the journey? How can we magnify the work that we know is already going on within the value chains? The secondary question to that is always whether we can do something specific for ourselves as a brand. But as Steve's already spoken to, like, we know that those supply chains don't work in that way. Like, nobody is farming a pig to be our pepperoni. We are taking bits of pigs, we're taking bits of beef animals to go on our pizza. You know, it's about kind of finding that bigger system. If there are opportunities to do something specifically for ourselves, we'd love to do it and drive even more momentum, but we just know they're not always there. And I guess then the final conversation we have is how we track that progress in data. Not because we like to sort of, you know, shout a huge amount about, aren't we great, haven't we solved so many things, and kind of get the kudos in that respect. But we really need to track any progress that we're making. You know, we can think we're having all the right conversations and that we're doing all the right things in our supply chains, but if actually we have no benchmark against which to kind of see, are we succeeding, it's really difficult to see if we need to go further or if we need to sort of focus in different areas. So yeah, once we've got all that action starting to take place, then we have the data conversation. So I guess that's kind of the way that we're trying to tackle it with our suppliers. And yeah, as I say, like also then talking to our peers in the industry about that approach that I'm taking and whether they're doing something similar or something different, so that, you know, the bit that's, you know, whoever's buying the other bits of our pigs, whether it's another hospitality business or another retailer, like we're trying to kind of just, I guess, add that momentum across the full industry so that we're all starting to sing off at least like similar hymn sheets, even if not the same one.
Yeah.
I think Kerry's mentions that just there, that again, put my procurement hat back on, is that it's the question of how do my procurement team measure what good looks like? So if we're buying a case of peppers, a case of onions, a case of mozzarella, I know how much I'm paying for a pound per kilo of the product. I know that the specification of the onions needs to be X amount of millimeters wide, otherwise we can't cut them correctly, etc., etc. Where's the standard or the measurement that says whether that's a good onion or a good piece of cheese? So how do I know what the carbon footprint is? How do I know what the impact is on biodiversity or animal welfare or water use, etc., etc.? There's no standard measurement of this. So as buyers, you know, we can't be experts in all these things. It's just not possible. And even if you certainly can't become experts in this level of detail for every single product you purchase, certainly not in an organisation like ours where we have 2 or 3 food buyers. So, you know, I can be any buyer to my company and say, if you're going to go out and buy something, a pound note is a pound note is a pound note, whether you're buying pepperoni, water, bin collections, whatever it happens to be. When I say, you know, tell me what that thing looks like from an environmental perspective, they look at me and go, what do you mean? I say, well, I don't know what I mean. I just want good. And, you know, so I know, you know, so carbon footprint is one lens you could look through. But, you know, the amount of our products that have a full life cycle analysis where the exact carbon footprint is understood of each individual product, it's minimal, if any, right? There's a handful of things on one hand, right, Ben? Exactly. And then, but that's just carbon. What's it doing to biodiversity? What's it doing to water stress?
Absolutely.
What's it to animal welfare? What about nutrition? There's a multifaceted decision. So wouldn't it be lovely if there was some kind of standard that just says, look, around the world, there's one standard, it's like a traffic light system, like there is for nutrition, where every government around the world got together, or, you know, driven by the United Nations or whoever, that said, look, this is how we're going to measure stuff around the world in some kind of consistent methodology. Because that's the other issue. Even if you had something done in the UK, half our products don't come from the UK. We import our product. Yeah. So how do you compare the environmental footprint, whatever that looks like, for, you know, tomatoes brought in from Spain in the summer and bought from the UK in the winter, or whatever it happens to be? It's difficult.
It would be lovely if that was on the agenda, I don't know, of something like COP.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. If we only had worldwide governments that cared about this stuff, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Keris, you were talking, and we've talked about the sort of the happy side of it and the good user story, and obviously Leprino was a very good user story for you, which really is beneficial for this podcast. But are there have you had any sort of, I don't know, negatives or pushbacks to the general approach, or to some of the asks you've had of your suppliers? I'm not asking you to name any names, but just some general themes on barriers that you've come across.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've never really had we don't think this is the right thing to be focusing on. Like, the industry is, you know, has really switched on to the fact that this is something that we have a responsibility to be tackling. And I would say that, you know, most people or most companies that I've spoken to would agree that this is, you know, an issue that they want to be working on. I think some of the barriers that I've potentially come up against is, you know, limited time and resource, you know, from the people I'm talking to, but also from myself. As I said, like, it's me and Steve that are the team at Heart with Smart, and we're trying to cover a lot of ground in not very much time. And, you know, we're lucky enough to have sustainability in our job titles. You know, some of the companies that we'd speak to, some of our suppliers, they don't have anybody with a sustainability job title. It's someone that's kind of got it tacked onto a technical job, or, you know, a supply chain job in some other function. So it's really difficult for people to find the time to I guess respond to any of my queries, and like on top of all of their day job.
I mean, we hear barriers. I mean, I've been talking to people about this space for 10 years, and I've heard every excuse going, and I'll say excuse is the wrong word, every reason going. So everything from, you know, I care about this, but my boss doesn't, or my boss does, but our shareholders don't, or my chief exec doesn't, or my customers don't, or we can't afford it, or it's too complicated, or our supply chain's too long-winded and detailed, or yeah, there's so many problems to tackle, we've only got space this year for one of those problems, or we've had Brexit, we had the pandemic, had the cost of living crisis, and there's been a whole host of reasons for people not to do this. But generally speaking, I'm with Keris. We very rarely come across somebody. In fact, I can't think of a single example where we've had a conversation with someone that's an absolute, you know, climate denial. I don't believe in this thing. It's all gobbledygook, you know, kind of stuff. Most people want to do the right thing. They don't necessarily know where to start because it's just too complicated. They're not educated enough. They don't know where to go to get the education. Or when they do understand what's required, it's just too complicated for people to tackle it on their own. And I think this is why we're so fortunate to have things like the Zero Carbon Forum, because I've personally been kind of swimming around this space for about a decade or so now, and it feels for the first time in a long time that since the Carbon Forum's come along, we're swimming actually kind of with the tide, not against it, because we're all swimming together. To some extent, it's massively helped, even if it's just sharing your problems with someone else that's in the same challenge, same industry with the same challenges. That in itself is quite cathartic and actually makes you realise you're not alone. But we are now starting to see much more collaboration across the sector, much more collaboration across sectors, you know, retail and hospitality working more closely together. We're certainly seeing quite a lot of interesting stuff coming out of RAP quite soon, and that will ramp up over the next 12 months. So I'm much more hopeful that you've now got retailers, consumers, hospitality organisations, manufacturers, processors, farming communities all acting together in the same way. And it's going to take a village to solve this. So I'm pleased we're starting to see that kind of happen now in the sector and further across.
Keris, I mean, obviously, sort of you're very involved in sort of those practical steps, sort of going forwards for Heart with Smart. If you were to have somebody sort of join the Zero Carbon Forum, or just through your sort of contacts and bits and pieces, and they were, like you said, one of those individuals, bless them, that's had a sort of sustainability tacked to their role. And I'm asking this because we always ask sort of, you know, what would you advise farmers? But I'm thinking actually we need to be asking the other question. So you had somebody like that come to you, and you know, they needed to take the first step, or more likely probably they need to take the first 3 steps to gain a bit of momentum in this. What do you think you'd advise them, the first 3 things you should do? And then perhaps Steve, you can sort of, from your point of view as well. But Keris, what do you think?
Someone in like my kind of a job function.
Yeah, your job, and maybe perhaps not with quite the experience that you sort of brought in, but yeah, they've found themselves now with this sort of you know, baton that they need to suddenly carry. Yeah, what's the first 3 steps they take on their
I mean, I think
race?
Race we're all running together, right? It's
absolutely, yeah.
I think, to be fair, I don't really know why I asked whether for my business or someone else, because I think the advice I'd give for anyone would be fairly similar. Like the best thing that you can do, the first step, is to understand where you are currently. So getting a good, you know, carbon footprint in place, whether it's using fairly simple data or something much more detailed, is absolutely the best first thing to do, because it shows you where to prioritize and where your sort of your emissions hotspots are, where your biggest impact and risk areas are, and that's exactly.
And there are people that can help you do that, because I mean that's not for sure. That's not an expertise rarely found in an organisation, is it?
No, absolutely not. I make that sound really, really challenging. But I mean, to be fair, I know that everyone that joins the Zero Carbon Forum, to your point, like you get a pretty basic but a good carbon footprint as part of your membership. Okay. So that, you know, there's a freely available tool. You can plug some data in there, and similar to the kind of the carbon counters that you can get for a farm, you know, you would see that, you know, put some data in, it spits out your footprint, and that is, you know, that's your baseline, and that's where you start looking. And even if you haven't used the most detailed specific data, you would have to go some, for example, for us not to have cheese and dairy as our #1 footprint. Like, so it will show you where your hotspots are. And then I guess the second step is then, okay, focus into and really prioritize those hotspots, because, you know, to Steve's point earlier, those are then our areas that we can take the responsibility for focusing on, and hopefully someone else is focusing on the slightly less material pieces for us. So start building those relationships within the supply chains, and kind of understanding the supply chains where you have that most material area. And I really mean supply chain when I say that. Understand it down to a farm perspective, because, you know, we know that FLAG is coming down the line, like forestry land and agriculture targets, where we'll have to split out the data separately, and we'll really see the big impact that agriculture has in terms of footprint. And that's not trying to point a finger there, that's just saying that's where the biological process happens. It's on a farm, it's where those emissions come from. So we really need to understand kind of as much as we can about what's going on. And if you don't need to understand it yourself, I guess the third thing is just work out who in the value chain does understand the bits you don't. Like, you know, there are amazingly well like educated, well-informed suppliers, farmers, everyone out there, and just be willing to kind of share that back and forth of the bits that you do know in the value chain, and learn about the bits that you don't, because I think that's the true collaboration, when we're open about the bits that we each know and don't know, that you then start learning from each other and find the opportunities to then go and take action. And I don't think it all has to be rocket science. A lot of the progress that we have made and that we still have to make is through technologies and actions that we already know. It's doing the good stuff well, being really efficient, and then waiting for, you know, I guess laying the right foundations for innovation to come in for the next bits that we do need. But there's a lot we can do from where we are right now. So I just don't think we need to be scared about it. We need to just get on with being good at what we do.
Everything Kerry said, but I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on this as well. And I think the questions go back to, if you're talking about someone coming to do the sort of role Kerry is doing, the questions you ask, the first questions you ask when you have your job interview, and the questions you should ask are, who are the decision makers in your business? What do they want, and are they open to change? Now, I think, you know, we've seen all sorts of really good people in kind of these kind of roles that absolutely flourish because they're working in organisations that either want to do the right thing and are willing to do it and throw whatever it takes to get it done, or are at least willing to listen to new ideas and are open to change. I've also seen kind of people, unfortunately, kind of last 6 months in organisations and get chewed up and spat out because they've been hired because someone wants them to be a sustainability manager, and actually when they get in there, they can't do their job, because the people that are actually making the decisions, or the shareholders, or the chief executive, actually, I'm bringing you as a token hire. I don't actually want to change anything. And unfortunately, I've seen that on a couple of occasions as well. So, and if that's the case, if you're a talented individual that actually wants to make change, go and work somewhere where you can actually make the change. Don't waste your time. You know, there's too many organisations that are crying out for good people. Go and work for one of those. And then once you're in that organisation, all the things that Kerry said make absolute sense.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, it does. Okay. Thinking now with my my sort of next section, sort of hat on and bits and pieces. Keris, obviously, as we've been talking, or as we've talked on sort of this section and previous bits, you mentioned efficiency. Love the word efficiency sometimes, but obviously it can also feel like a bit of a race to the bottom. So I suppose there's two parts here. How do you see the supply chain collaborating to sort of bring this word efficiency, or whatever that word efficiency is, to life? And really, I suppose, what do we mean by efficiency? It's not really a race to the bottom, is it, in terms of what we're looking to support here?
No, I don't think it is. I think especially when you're talking agriculturally, I think efficiency, well, and for ourselves as a business, it's using the resources you have in the best way, not using the least amount of those resources. So I think squeezing every little bit out of the resources that you have, that for me is efficiency, and it's sustainability as well, right? Because if you're getting the most out of something, it's got to be more sustainable than if you're sort of using half of it and throwing it away. So that's kind of how I think on efficiency, and I think that rings true for agricultural as well. In terms of how we improve efficiency across the sector, I think it's a bit of a loaded chalice, because I don't think we're being inefficient as it is. I don't think anyone gets out of bed wanting to do a bad job, and I don't think the agricultural industry is inefficient. I think that there is just more that we can do. to improve our use of those resources. And I think, you know, improving skill sets so that we can see those inefficiencies is a really key one. And I know, Ben, we've been involved in a project you've been doing to sort of improve those skills and upskill ourselves, upskill farmers, upskill, you know, the full value chain to see those inefficiencies and kind of head them off at the pass. So that's a really big one for me. And I think using the data is another really key one, because we can think we're being really efficient until we see the cold hard facts and we see the numbers and we think, oh God, actually there is probably much more I could do. And you don't know until you see that data. And so I think, yeah, looking at data with an open mind and learning from people who are maybe being that slightly more efficient, to use the word efficient yet another time, but, you know, learn from the people that are doing that little bit of it great. And I'm sure that they would have stuff to learn from you in other areas as well. So I think, yeah, that's kind of how I view the efficiency piece, is more with what we have rather than more with less.
Yeah, makes good sense.
Efficiency is a lovely word, right? Because it saves you money and saves your carbon footprint, and it's one of those things that frustrates me, because there's lots of low-hanging fruit out there for all sorts of organisations. If you just do things the right way, doing the right thing, actually in lots of cases makes you more money, right? And once you get past all of that, you then get the stuff that's actually, oh, this is quite difficult, and it's going to require a big investment, and that's where some organisations, including ourselves, are now starting to get to that stage. But you know, any organisation, whether it's, you know, a restaurant producer or a farmer that's been massively inefficient for 20 years, has probably self-selected them out of the marketplace. So I don't think there are huge amounts of people out there that are, you know, leaving the fridge doors open and leaving the gas ovens on overnight, etc., because those businesses can't afford to do that anymore, right? So are there massive inefficiencies to iron out the market? I don't think so. Will there be some opportunities? Yes. And I think it's kind of this sharing of data piece that Kerry's talked about. I think is critical, especially when you start to benchmark yourself against your peers. So one of the benefits we have of having 150 restaurants is, you know, you can always compare, you know, those restaurants against the other 149. And a good example for us in the last 12 months, you know, we think we've squeezed most of the pips on things like energy efficiency over the last decade or so. We've created an energy action squad in our business 12 months ago, and we've saved on, I think, about 9 to 10% of our energy costs over the last 12 months. And that's largely by saying, what are the best restaurants doing, and how do we make sure we kind of take those good behaviours and reinforce it everywhere? It's not doing anything, you know, massively new. It's about actually making sure we're checking against our peer group and saying, what are they doing? What can I copy?
So there's a really lovely parallel there, and almost a seemingly natural segue into, obviously that applies to benchmarking groups in farmers and various other bits and pieces. And the obvious barriers to benchmarking at a farm level could be the lack of the available data, perhaps a lack of trust to share that data, and various other bits and pieces. But you guys have actually started to engage with a number of our farmers, and as you've said, you've talked to wheat farmers and various other bits and pieces. Data is a barrier. We can and we've talked about data quite a bit, dare I say it. But in your conversations with farmers, I suppose there's a two-part. Steve, we'll start with yourself. Have they talked about the barriers they see to sort of meeting our sort of collective societal obligations, and sort of, you know, do we see sort of some opportunities across the supply chain to minimise or mitigate some of those barriers, do you think?
I think our conversations with farmers, I think they're very early days.
Yes.
So I think the two things themes I see coming across. One is we just don't know what the right thing to do is. So we have spoken to some farmers, we just don't know what the right thing to help educate us. Yeah. And that's why something in the programs you're running to educate your farming community is amazing, because it helps spread the word very quickly and get some big benefits. The second challenge is for farms that know what the right thing is to do. The question is, well, how do we actually get credit for that or get value for that through the value chain? So sometimes the barrier is like, okay, if I'm going to go with all this work and effort, there's two parts to the equation. I think there's if I do something differently, is it going to benefit me directly without anybody else's intervention? So I either do it as a farmer because I think it's the right thing to do, or I do it because it makes my farm more resilient by increasing the quality of the soil for future crop growing, etc.
Or just brings me more money through my milk.
Or it saves more money, exactly. Yeah. And then you get to the stage. I'm sure there'll be lots of people in the farming community at the same stage as in the restaurant community that go, I've done the simple stuff that makes it easier for me and saves me money and does the right thing. I'm now at the stage where I've got to invest. And if I'm going to invest, when am I going to get that payback? So unless you've got a billionaire philanthropist behind you that's going to say, well, just do the right thing and I'll fund it. And if they're out there, let me know, because I'd like some investment from them, please. Yeah. Otherwise, you've got to find a way, how do you get the value for that? So one of the questions that does come up quite often is cost. So if I go back to, you know, the wheat farm that's doing things the right way will dump all of his grain in a grain store with a farm that's not doing the right things the right way, and they'll get paid the same amount per ton of grain, and that doesn't seem entirely fair, right?
Yeah.
Now, I understand in that situation, and with the same thing with dairy farms, we're already having these conversations with some of your farms, is how do we make sure that through the chain there are incentives, whether it's, you know, financial incentives that actually make sure people are doing the right thing. And I think at some stage there's going to come a tipping point where to do all the really hard stuff, someone's got to pay for it. Now, the margins in most parts of the food sector are wafer thin, whether you're a producer, a manufacturer, a brand. You know, if the price of your one product goes up 20%, you know, it's very hard to, no one can take that on the chin, right? So ultimately, you know, the cost needs to be spread evenly across the value chain. So if we're going to invest in this stuff, I think farmers have to take some of the brunt of that. So do the producers, so do we as brands, so do our customers. So at some stage, right, we're going to have to, our customers coming through our door are going to have to be prepared to pay a slight premium for their product, knowing their product is a better product. Now, the challenge with that, I think, is going to be, this is where things like legislation and lawmaking can play a part, because it's much easier to do those things if there's a level playing field, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, and unless you've got, and there are certain brands, if you look at retail in particular, it's probably more easy to spot. There's certain supermarkets that, you know, there's two I can think off the top of my head where they're more likely to be able to get away with charging a premium price for a premium product because their consumers will take it. Okay. And there's other retailers that won't be able to do that. It's the same thing in restaurants, right? If I'm going and dropping £300 on a Michelin star meal, I'd probably be okay if they're going to charge me £10 extra to make sure that that meal is produced in a way that's, you know, very environmentally friendly, great for animal welfare. And going in for a £6 burger on a Saturday night, would I personally probably would be, but actually with the majority of the consumers, I don't know is the issue. Some would, some wouldn't.
What fun you'd had on that Friday night, Steve, perchance.
It does. It depends on how much sustainably produced beer I've been drinking, right? Exactly.
Indeed.
But I think this is where, to some extent, you know, if central government got their act together and produced some kind of way of levelling the playing field on some of this stuff, and I'm not actually necessarily against legislation, taxation for the right thing, incentives for the right things. The fact we still don't know exactly what the incentive schemes are that farmers are working on in a post-Brexit world, that's a bit of a challenge, right?
Yeah, it's about, and I suppose, where that legislation taxation comes in, it's that guarantee that the value raised by that reaches the primary producer to do the right thing in the first place. It's not lining the pockets of anyone.
Absolutely.
Anyone beyond that piece. Yeah.
That comes down to the trust again, and the transparency and all of that type of thing that we have talked about a lot. Actually, it's creating that full circle. It doesn't just come because somebody says, here's an extra point whatever on a litre of milk. It's a massive incentivization, but actually the whole system needs to come into play.
Absolutely. And bizarrely and counterintuitively, you know, I have lots of conversations both within both the forums that I work within, where we say, well, are we actually in danger here of going into very dangerous anti-competitive territory? So even where you have retailers or hospitality organisations that collectively want to do the right thing, we sit there and go, well, if we do this, are we going to fall foul of competition law because we're almost acting as a cartel to save the planet? And how bad is that? Which is a ridiculous conversation when you think about it. But those conversations are taking place in boardrooms, you know, on a regular basis. And I can't collaborate with my competitor down the road to improve the milk sector or the pizza cheese sector because I'm collaborating with my competitor down the road. I'm not allowed to do that legally.
I do think things are changing though, because there's been some movement in terms of being able to have certain conversations as long as it's about environment and green and all of those things, that competition law doesn't cover that in quite the same way. So I think that's really positive. And I think another conversation that we have been able to have in the right way in like the likes of the Zero Carbon Forum is not necessarily about the price of whatever we're asking for, but about the mechanism of to how you drive those interventions in. So, you know, we might not say, oh, we're going to pay 50 pence more for whatever it is, but we might say we're going to track that activity, and if we know it's happening on a farm or it's coming through into a product, we may be able to find like the right mechanism of making sure that that money flows through. So it's having the right conversation rather than, as you say, creating an environmental cartel, which I think would probably be frowned upon.
Yeah. Even if it shouldn't be.
True.
Yeah.
That's another conversation completely, isn't it?
Right, absolutely.
There's probably sort of again, a bit like Leprino, you sort of sat between two extremes of the supply chain, from farmers at the one end to the ultimate end user, the consumer of goods at the other. If you could sort of have one wish, and I hate doing these simple things. We talked about this, isn't it? It's not easy. It's complex in bits and pieces. But one start point or one point of requested sort of start for both of those stakeholders, for the farmer and the consumer, what would they be? One thing you'd like them to start to do or think about?
Where you like we really try to listen to each other.
Yeah.
You know, because as I mentioned as well, maybe it's not completely the same, but if I talk to franchisees and talk about our ESG work, the first response would always be, it sounds like it's going to cost us money. But if you then have a really good discussion about the whole thing, there's a lot of willingness to try. And actually, they're doing a lot of things already. They just never thought of it this way. And like with the farmers as well, I think, I mean, if you're a good
very
farmer,
similar conversation and response, I think,
sure.
and quite rightly so, actually.
Yeah. Hi. So I think for us just to, you know, look at it in a different way, try to move away from that, oh, you're asking something complicated, I don't want to do that, to like, what are we really talking about? Because there's a common goal in all of this. And the common goal is that we all want to build towards a sustainable future for all of us in many ways, looking at our children, grandchildren. I mean, my previous employer was a family-owned company. I really had that long-term view where you just really feel that you're currently just a chapter in the book and you want to hand over, they want to hand over a clean heritage, as they call it, to the next generation. They were in vinegar as well, so it's like literally. But yeah, so that's they're more obviously, but this is the first one that comes to mind, Ben, because I think it's all about the attitude and mindset, and there's then much more we can do.
So is that the same at the customer end? Would it be would the message be the same both ways? Is collaborate, ask the questions and engage, or is it a different message for the customer?
Yeah, the customer, in some ways it is. Discussion we've had, the first thing that, I mean, if you talk about Domino's, sustainability is not the first thing that comes to mind, if I'm being fair. It's also my response when they approached me for this role. Okay, Domino's sustainability was not my first thought, but then I learned about like the passion, the team, and the ambition. So obviously, they convinced me on that. But it's still like there's a different perception of the brand, so you cannot change overnight that perception. So we're doing a lot internal engagement and bringing marketing on this journey as well. So what we could do, or we can do, and working on this, is provide transparency to that customer. That the customer, if the customer orders our pizza, things like we have Nutri-Score in Europe, so they already know about the nutritional value. We're one of the first, or in some markets, the first QSR to have this available. But we also looked at like an eco label, so the environmental footprint of the pizza. So this is where you can start nudging your customer by providing this transparency. It's an interesting one. It's a challenging one. Marketing is often one of the most difficult internal stakeholders in many companies to get on board. So you need to find that right balance where you make it interesting while not scaring away the customer, because you're actually trying to do the right thing.
I was going to say, you completely talk my language, Makita, in terms of some of the phrases you've used around mindset and attitude and nudging and, you know, concrete actions and that type of thing. And when you were talking a minute ago, the one other word that came to me was framing. And I think, like you say, it's about framing things in a certain way so that it doesn't always appear to be from your franchise's point of view and the farmer, it doesn't always appear that it's another thing to do, but actually how can you utilize what you're already doing to help to tell the story? Because I think in farming especially, and even at CL, we are very guilty of this, we take so much of what we do as our normal day-to-day, but actually the normal day-to-day is really valuable and really worthwhile. And so how can we capture that across the whole of the supply chain so that we can bring that story together to show the customer at the other end and to engage them and to get them to be part of the collaboration as well. And so I think all of that is so important.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Helen. We always have this one moment a year when we release a sustainability report and people say, wow, we're doing so many things. That's also feedback to us. We still need to communicate so much more, obviously. But it's that moment where you just make a sort of a photo of the moment, and like a screenshot of where you are today, and like, okay, we've actually done quite a lot. But there's also, I also often feel like this myself, where you so often focus on things that need to be done, still need to be done, and that's in your mind, like you're focused on, okay, we haven't done this, we need to do that.
The next thing,
the next thing, and then to look back, it's you often forget about that, but it's important. I mean, it's also, if you want to get people on board, it's very important to say, no, not everything you've done is wrong. Clearly, the opposite. You've done many great things, and we just expect you to do more of that.
Yeah.
You
And I
might
think
not have all the answers, but
what I'm really looking forward to as part of this podcast series is hearing from so many people of what they have done.
Yeah.
Because I think that will be really helpful as well to all of the listeners, is to understanding what has been done. Yes, some things have worked brilliantly, other things have fallen down. But going back to what we said before, where have we learned, what have we done, and what do we do next? And it's just taking that review point of view to actually say, yeah, we're on a journey, we're moving forward, we've got our targets, but we're doing it together, and let's do it together.
It also feels to me, I would imagine, that it's more empowering and more people feel more enabled to, if they hear about things that have already been done, and it's just not that you start from scratch.
Absolutely.
It's also how I started this role. Like, I'm not going to do everything anew, you know. It's just like building on what's already there, because it's a waste of people's time and effort if you're just gonna. Why would you? There's so many things I've started. For me, it's really neat about the journey that we're all on. It's a cliche word, but it's true.
Completely. I use it so much. It's completely
so much, but it is. It's still the best word to explain what like the transition phase that we're in. Many challenges, but it should be something that people want to be part of. I think that's also internally one of it. You know, communication engagement is really important, where you just make it something that people just want to be a part of. And this is also coming back to my earlier point about like wanting to have a positive impact, because this is also how you get people on that journey. If you can make it something, you know, forward looking, that is actually a really good, very nice thing, instead of saying we have such a huge environmental impact. You know, so it's like this mountain you cannot even start thinking of climbing, just too high.
Yeah.
Instead you say, you know, something good. You know, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this together, and it's not gonna be easy. This is literally one of my pitches. Like, start with understanding. So the vision is like the top of the mountain. So how high is that? And then you start measuring where you are today. That's, you know, base camp. If you know where you want to go, if you know where you start today, you can start mapping your journey. But I can tell you, like, you can have the best plans in the world, but they always change. So you're going to take like one step forward, you know, maybe go left, go right. You're going to take 2 steps back. But just know you want to get to that top of the mountain together. That's the journey.
Absolutely. In terms of that journey then, so we sign up as a Future Food Movement member, and obviously we've had conversations beyond the membership about, so what do we do, and what are we pulling from that, and obviously we've talked about upskilling and bits and pieces, but generally speaking, on those that are perhaps a bit further along the journey than Leprino, what have been the steps in upskilling that they've come and asked for, the bits they're trying to do to get a better understanding, and then where do things like the Farmer Advisory Board and the youth group fit in? Are they gaps that you've identified and they're just there, or is there like a progression where they come in sort of down the line from first steps?
Yeah, so typically people, businesses will join, and they can almost window shop and browse the events and the, you know, community huddles and everything that we run on a monthly basis, that they can tap into. And then I would say, as a business, they pretty much know they would identify a need of specific teams that need help upskilling, and kind of to go through a more formal education and upskilling program, whether that's through a suite of masterclasses or one of our accelerators, or coming to do an in-person kind of leadership upskilling day. We're doing a huge amount trying to support customer facing teams at the moment, so working with NPD, new product development, commercial teams, and also senior leadership teams, because actually they really need to understand the strategic narrative out there, what's being talked about, even just the acronyms like SBTI, science-based target. They need to be able to confidently, they need to be able to confidently articulate what their business is doing, but also understand the big big issues, the big picture out there, the landscape, which is moving so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that is a really hot topic within the industry and within the community is the whole piece around less but better meat. What does that mean? There's no actual industry definition on this, and we have quite a few meat and dairy members who are doing brilliant work into kind of decarbonising and recognising they've got an almighty challenge ahead of them. But the commercial teams are having to face into this less but better meat, but they don't know what it means. They don't know how to answer it. And the default is to say, let me bring my sustainability manager along. And when there's one sustainability manager, that's a big red flag that there is a skills gap, an issue, and actually they could be moving a lot faster if it was truly embedded and their whole business really informed and educated on this. Because it is hard. It's such a complicated issue, what we're trying to do.
And like you say, the science and the research and the evidence is moving at such a pace, even over the last 5 years, and where we're going to be headed in the next 5 years. It really is. And I know a lot of CL members are obviously looking at from a meat purpose, decarbonising, but actually the swing of that is nutritional value.
Yeah.
And that is a real balancing tipping point. And when you're saying better but less, okay, where's the better coming from? How do we get to the better, and then how much is the less, exactly as you said? So that tipping point is something that is really on the horizon, and lots of conversations going on about it. How do we evidence that at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we have a real a mission in that if we can build people's knowledge and therefore confidence to start talking and more actively participate, that's when we'll start to see a real shift in kind of progress. Because at the moment it's just happening in pockets, and we're not experts. I would like to think I know a little bit of everything, but I'm learning all the time. Like, I've learned loads from Ben, and that's what I had no idea. Well, I hadn't even thought, and that's the thing, you don't think about it if you're not walking in their shoes. Like, when Ben and I talk about the climate skills gap, I hadn't even thought there was a digital skills gap at farm level, which when you think about it is really obvious. And then and it's these conversations that you then start to seed. And I've connected Ben with loads of people within the supply chain who are trying to understand, how can I work with my suppliers better? I need to look at dairy and meat. What do I do? And I'm like, I know exactly who you can talk to kind of showcase some of the good stuff and how you could approach it. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with the community.
Yeah, it's those unknown unknowns. And I think we'll probably talk about this more throughout the podcast, to be honest, but those unknown unknowns can really catch us out.
Yeah. And you don't know what you don't know. But then, again, being the optimist, once you know, you can't unknow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Once you know, it's that knowledge becomes power, not from a almighty type of thing, but actually enabling that knowledge to come out and share that knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a great quote, isn't there, about filling your cup of knowledge, but then actually understanding how, when, and who to let that knowledge out to as well is part of that power, not just keeping it to yourself. And that's what I think that the movement and other organisations are definitely trying to facilitate, which is fantastic.
And I like the balance actually of how we've come together. I mean, I see one of the barriers to change, and I think this is, I'm assuming from what you've said, this is exactly why you've pulled this mixed, diverse group together, is if you throw what could be taken, and it never should be, but what could be taken as a very simple message of less but better across any commodity, it can be really polarizing. If you say to a farmer, we need less but better of any product, they're instant, they hear the less, and they price the cost of better, and realize that this is a challenge. And you almost have to unpick where that's come from, because there would have been some voices that have said, we need less, more than they would have mentioned the better pieces coming through, and that's based on an assumption that agriculture is doing nothing actually to shift. And if you assume that agriculture isn't going to reach net zero and they haven't committed to a 24 target in bits and pieces, categorically, you're going to have to say we need less in order to lower our footprint. But then it's very challenging, I think, for farmers, and that's the value of that farmer advisory board. It's very challenging for farmers to hear that and then not have a platform to go, but you do realise we're doing this and we're doing that. And actually, the argument then comes, well, if we've reached net zero, we've got zero emissions. You can eat as much as you want. But that's why it's worth pointing out, I think, on this, the reason you talk about less but better, or you talk about probably a balance, I think is probably a better, less divisive phrase, is you don't just educate about climate in isolation, do you? There's climate and health. And I think we have to make that clear now. When we are talking about this message of balance, actually we have to look at health and planet. And there are a few of us, me included, who might overindulge in certain commodities, and it wouldn't hurt us to cut back. But at a global level, that's a different conversation again.
Yeah, no, we actually, it's just such a complex debate that's so much more than carbon, and taking that food systems approach, and a real focus for us now, and the work that we're doing both from Veris and Future Food Movement is, the biggest challenge that we as an industry and society have got to face into is how do we solve the climate and the health challenge when you think about everything that's going on from a health perspective with obesity, diet related health issues, but also from a food insecurity perspective as well. Like, these are all multiply integrated issues that we can't look at in silos. So increasingly everything we're doing is around that systems approach and how do we deliver on the co-benefits, but also the wicked problem that the food industry is facing into in how do we make it affordable, how do we make it accessible and available to everybody, and that is like the super challenge and really the North Star that we've got to crack. And lots of food businesses and food leaders who are involved in the periphery of this with their day jobs, they're probably thinking it's all about net zero. And that's what they've hung on to, but it's so much more than carbon and net zero, and the incredible social value that the farming industry is delivering within the UK, I think in the human side, is really underappreciated and underestimated as well.
And food connects all of that.
Yeah.
And that's the key, isn't it? But coming back to your point about sort of that carbon, we call it like carbon tunnel vision. It's amazing how we will get people ask, can you do us a carbon 101? Well, we can, but actually what we'd like to do is look at the whole sort of metric and not just think about carbon, but how does water come into it, and biodiversity, and like you say, utilization, waste, all of those types of things that form part of that. And food is integral to all of those as an input or as an output, including health and all of that kind of stuff. And what you said a bit earlier, Ben, around balance, and then the bit about less but better, the word that sprung to my head when we were talking about that, and I know we're talking about in a future podcast, is efficiency. Less but better, does that bring connotations of efficiency? And I'm wondering, as part of the Future Food Movement, whether that's something that crops up in a number of your conversations or events.
I mean, we when people think of less but better, I think the natural reaction is efficiency and therefore lower carbon. But actually, it's so much more than that. And I think it's very dangerous to look at it from just that one metric of lower carbon, because before we know it, we're going to therefore just be end with very intensified agriculture, which doesn't feel right at all. Just low carbon, cheap meats. I think we have to, the health piece, the nutrient density, the whole kind of like the natural cycle, the soil health, everything that we can deliver as a food system, and actually the critical role livestock has to play. And I think it's more about decoupling from, terrible word, the crap, and focus on how the production and how we do this better as part of a kind of closed loop circular economy, kind of whole food system space. And my biggest frustration is when the people that are part of the lower end, so to speak, from a standards and performance perspective in this space, they cherry pick the narrative around it. And I think that's really, really dangerous, and is doing a huge disservice to all of the brilliant farmers and producers out there who are recognising they've got to change, they've got to shift, and are working for a better food system. That's kind of my biggest frustration that I see.
There's people at both ends, though, then, isn't there, really, that are sort of hell-bent on cutting their nose off to spite their face. Will either do what we've always done, and then perhaps they're missing out on the opportunities to do things better. But there are those that are hell-bent on system change in the absolute extreme, who then forget the systems approach. And I think that's the bit that worries me. And the most powerful piece for me, and this is why, I'll be 100% honest, this is why the Future Food Movement approach enticed me in, was this is from a place of education. And I suppose my question to you is, I mean, because we are seeing people that sort of are advocating for not less but zero, and various other bits and pieces, and they forget that sort of, it's not just the food on your plate, but it's the fibre on your back, the heat in your home, the fuel in your car, the ecosystem services you mentioned there that a lot of farmers are working to produce on top of food as well. And if you get rid of one, the whole house crumbles down. You know, we talk about you need a farmer 3 times a day and you need a doctor hopefully never, and so on and so forth. But actually, it's not just 3 times a day. It's every time you put, you know, 2 legs into a pair of trousers or pants or whatever it is that you're putting on, you know, your woolen socks to various other bits and pieces. So, I mean, that's my greatest fear there. In terms of education then as a solution, there are obviously barriers to that education itself. So what are you seeing as the barriers to educating, I suppose, at both ends, you know, both those that we're hoping to influence to change on the ground, we'll call them farmers, but it's more than just farmers, the industry, and then those at the top who are perhaps trying to drive change because of investors. What's the barrier to education?
I think it's about providing the information and that's out there, so that people can have more informed conversations. But I also think it's more about active listening as well. So and that's something that we're really trying to facilitate. So we obviously had our kind of we do it with members. So members that, because I think people really need to hear and see from people actually doing the do, not just this abstract kind of, you know, targets and strategies and ESG and everything. They want to hear from people that are actually rolling their sleeves up and doing stuff. And so Ben and I had a live chat on the community about all of the brilliant work Ben's done within his supply chain and kind of giving a bit of a proof point about how dairy can be part of the solution. And honestly, it was genuinely one of my proudest moments of Future Food Movement. There was lots of like chat on LinkedIn because we use LinkedIn as a great communications tool. And one of our members, who is a sustainability director of quite a well-known vegan brand, plant-based brand, said, I loved this session because I hadn't realised, I'm really paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was something like, you know, I work for a vegan plant-based business. I would assume she's vegan, I don't know. But she said, listening to Ben makes me realise that there is a role for livestock in the food system. And like we had managed to bring probably someone with more extreme views more into the centre of, you know, while she probably from a her own ethical perspective doesn't agree with the livestock industry, she could see the positive role they can play, and I think that is so important to try. And equally, my other pet peeve is how much possibly the meat and dairy industry and some farmers, and I know it comes from a place of fear and again a lack of understanding, is they're so anti and bash what the plant-based side is trying to do. But all we're actually all trying to do in our own way is produce a better food system, and there's a role for everybody. Don't know if
we
I
have
answered your
talked
question
about that conflict comms, haven't we, a couple of times, and there are those absolutely at either extreme, and let's not just suggest that, you know, this is sort of activism type comms, because that's unfair. There is definitely a role for activists. I'd call myself one, perhaps others wouldn't, but you know, I want to change things. That's activism. But that conflict comms is doing nobody any good, is it?
No, and I think it's I mean, there's a bit of a corporate buzzword around calling it green hushing. People are frightened to speak up now because you just get a pile on for talking about what you know, a pocket of really good stuff. And it's trying to get that balance right. I mean, we get criticised for working with food businesses that people see as part of the problem, but to be honest, unless you help these businesses become part of the solution, we're never going to achieve what we need to achieve at the pace we need to see it.
It changes one-upmanship into actual education that can drive change, and knowledge that can drive change. And while we all know it's not just about education, there are many other levers that need to be pressed to deliver change. One-upmanship is not the way to do it. It's not helpful, and it doesn't create any sort of environment that change at the rate, as you said, at the rate that we need to get to is going to be delivered in any way, shape or form.
So I think this is refreshing, and maybe this is just how I'm hearing it, but, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Kate, so I suppose my question is, am I hearing you right? That's my broad question. But it sounds like supply chain wants to know how to move. There are lots of assumptions. There's a need to avoid the combative type nature, but what they are solely missing is that voice back up the supply chain. There's an appetite to hear from farmers, and therefore we need to come as farmers. And I say we because I'm in that board, but we should note that I'm not a real farmer now. I have done it. But as an industry backup, we need to come back with that information, and we need to be open and honest and engaging. Is that, I suppose, is that what I'm hearing? And then I suppose my question is why is that so hard then?
I don't know. I don't know really. I suppose and we obviously ran our first session last week. And there's two things to note. We've got 7 farmers on the panel, and I would call them all the younger generation. I'm making the assumption
and
that
they are proper real farmers too.
Yeah, they're all, I think, under 40, I would say. So to me, that's the younger generation. We actually struggled, believe it or not, initially to find farmers brave enough to speak out. And some farmers said, I'll do it, but only if it's anonymously, which I think is heartbreaking and says a lot. So I hats off to this crowd of farmers who are prepared to have honest conversations. And I just think it's really important to understand, you know, and we started the session with like, tell us about what was last year like for you. Obviously not great. And it's,
quite heartbreaking
but also,
in some situations.
Also really important for their buyers effectively to hear that in the room from a retail and manufacturing perspective. But I hope it was also valuable for them to hear how tough it's been in manufacturing and processing as well, and why some of the decisions have been made. And actually I was really proud of some of our members who were asked quite difficult questions by the farmers. And no, everyone was very polite, no aggression, everyone was on the same page. We're here to try and fix things. But I was really proud of some of the, you know, some big manufacturers were asked difficult questions that they, I think, felt lent into honestly and answered honestly. And also there was lots of discussion about, well, what could we do better? Who needs to be hearing this? And one of the things that came out quite strongly was it'd be brilliant to get some procurement teams and directors in the room to kind of hear more on the ground, and vice versa. And also for the farmers to learn how this procurement cycle and system within the corporate food system actually works.
To build that understanding, to build that knowledge. So actually when they are pushed into that system, then they actually have a bit of a knowledge as how it's coming down the pipeline, as well as their opportunity up the pipeline.
I think it was the first one we did, and it overran, which I think says a lot, that there was just so much to talk about, and it was such a broad topic of conversation, wasn't it, Ben? Like we touched everything from mental health through to productivity to climate change and kind of personal beliefs in this. But it did feel like a very at the end of it, quite a cohesive kind of message and community that came out from it, that we're now kind of thinking how can, and this is, you know, we're learning all the time, and we're really, I would like to think, an agile membership community, because we're now thinking, well, what can we do to help as a membership community? What other experts can we bring in? What other masterclasses, what other events could we convene around some of the topics that was talked about as an issue?
Well, on that, we have talked about sort of expanding the nature of those events, and sort of there have been a number of Leprino farmers who've been very brave recently about coming to events and talking quite publicly. And that's definitely sort of something we're keen to do. I suppose pivoting away from the farmer advisory group, you mentioned strategy there and linking procurement. It definitely came up, and it's definitely something that I've sort of noted with some of our very strategic customers. There are individuals I talk to who are 100% committed to supporting a more sustainable supply chain. Then I have obviously sort of sales colleagues who will talk to procurement colleagues in the same business, and we quibble on price. First conversation absolutely is we quibble on price. And there's a shift. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge, actually, there are some really brave companies who are linking very, very very clearly on sort of corporate targets and reward, actually, for doing good, not just good at a profitable point of view. So credit where credit's due. But perhaps with your Veris hat on, are we close enough to that being the norm at the moment, or is that really one of the fairly sizable barriers we have to overcome? And I realise that might put you in a difficult position.
I think you're right. It's an emerging, we're starting to see some kind of like green shoots of progress for sure. And I think procurement and supply chain teams are now being tasked with delivering scope 3, the carbon reduction across the supply chain. That's very firmly being sat with them now, which I think there's Ben alluded to, there's a big buying behaviour shift we need to see. If we step back a bit and say, well, it's not they have been tasked and judged on all their career to buy in a certain way, which is around value, which typically has been about price. But now, actually, what do we mean by value and quality? It absolutely has to bring in sustainability metrics now. So I think that is starting to become much more commonplace. But yeah, it's at the early shoots, I would say.
It's becoming part of the conversation rather than part of the strategy at the moment. But there's the opportunity for that to grow, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the biggest block actually is the parking the price piece. It's the short-termness of it, and actually you need long-term partnerships to make a real impact. And again, it comes down to the education and skills gap, not understanding agriculture and farming. This is long-term stuff you need to be planning for and investing into your supply chain to kind of reap the rewards. And so many contracts are just done on 12-month cycles, and it doesn't work like that in agriculture. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were talking about how we can put in metrics to understand breeding changes within the beef sector, and I was like, we can absolutely do that. I said, but you've got to put in a long-term funding, because this does not change overnight. This does not change next year or the year after. We're talking about sort of minimum sort of 5 years upwards in terms of that sort of funding that is needed, and that comes from corporate, but it also comes to funding bodies as well. That change in that element needs as well. So it's not just coming from corporate; it's coming from other places. That change needing to be done. Yeah.
It also speaks of sustainability in the broadest terms, doesn't it? In that sort of that provides some financial sustainability, which is obviously an underpinning then of environmental sustainability, which is the end goal. But actually, this sort of, it's not an exploitation, but this very capitalist sort of approach to how we're doing things at the moment, with a very tight focus on cost, financial value. Actually, it doesn't play that well with people either. Why would somebody invest in something if there is no guarantee of return, when the farming cycle does take 5 years? Why would I do that and then risk my mental health? And we talked a lot about farming mental health and various other bits and pieces, but one of the bits that I hope most that comes out of the Farming Advisory Board, and I don't know if you sort of share this, is if we can educate not just about sort of what's being done and the goods and the good and bits and pieces, and I'll steal sort of, or credit Charlie, having stolen sort of this thought process from her. But if we can educate those buying products from farmers that you're not just buying a product, you're buying heritage and culture and the sweat off their back and the fear that goes into sort of running a business and all of those bits and pieces too, then maybe we might have a different dialogue. And maybe that's a little bit too huggy and kumbaya, and I should have a campfire and a tiny guitar. I do have a tiny guitar somewhere. I can't play it, but maybe that is. But I mean, is that a bit too much, Kate? Is that a bit ridiculous?
I think particularly those kind of and there's no blame here. It's just it is a systems problem, as we talk about all the time. They're making buying decisions behind a spreadsheet, behind a screen. They're not seeing the real life that this affects of someone. And again, I'm just listening to farmers and listening to their real life experiences of the fact that they get a 12-month contract, or they're growing this season, but they don't know what they'll get paid next season. Like the instability of it is insane. They can't go to the bank to get a loan so that they can invest in more sustainable practices, which we desperately need to see. And actually all of these big food businesses need them to do, but it's just, you can just see at every point it's so disjointed, and it wouldn't be that hard to link it up into so that it benefits everybody in the system. But no, I'm a big passionate believer we need to dial up the human element and the emotion more, and any lever that we can pull to kind of get to those more positive relationships, I think is a good thing.
Turning it from a commodity turning it from a buying
Yes,
a commodity
yeah.
into buying into somebody's business.
Yes, yeah,
And
absolutely.
That's part of it, isn't it? And it does. I think from a dairy point of view, we've always talked about the volatility curve within the dairy industry. And, you know, back ages, I'm showing my age here, we used to talk about sort of a 7-year volatility and then a 5-year volatility. And now who knows where that volatility is, and contracts really do.
Week by week.
Yeah, week by week. And contracts come into that. If you're only being given a 12-month contract, then the volatility becomes every 12 months, and that's not healthy.
No.
So I suppose, I mean, that's given us a whole broad piece from sort of the financial sustainability. We've talked about people, probably not nearly enough, but there's only so much time in the day. And obviously this is leading to an environmental sustainability. You know, and quite a clear, well-defined glide path, actually. I think we've established that. So, I mean, that's where it's going. And some of that is not long enough long term, but it is far enough out. If we were sort of, you know, to sort of, you know, sort of wrap this up in bits and pieces, in terms of sort of and we've tried a few top threes and sort of, you know, the most important things and various other bits and pieces, and it's a little bit hard, but sort of I'll ask the same question to both of you, and I'm sure there'll be some overlap, and that's fine. It just shows, you know, those things that are massively impactful. But what is the sort of takeaway message? You know, we've talked now for however long it is and various other bits and pieces, but if there was one thing that you want people to grasp on that is vitally needed, or an action that should happen immediately, or bits and pieces, or there's a takeaway message you'd want people to take from this conversation, what would it be? Steve, we'll start with yourself.
Don't be scared and talk to other people about your issues. So lots of the things that people need to do in this space are not as difficult as they seem at first glance. They're just difficult because we don't understand them. I remember when I first got into this space 10 years ago, I was bamboozled, terrified that, you know, that you just get overwhelmed. It's very easy to get anxiety in this space because the challenge seems so difficult. You haven't got to solve it all overnight. Just solve a bit of it one day at a time, and just do something. So don't be scared. Dive in and talk to other people and learn from people that are, you know, are further ahead of you. Stand on the shoulders of the giants next to you.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Keris, what do you think?
I mean, I don't disagree with Steve, to be honest. I think some of it you can start cracking on.
The other question is, and I don't know why we haven't asked anybody this question yet. I'm definitely going to ask some of the farmers what they think of this. So maybe you'll be a counterpoint or a sort of a co-point to this. We do occasionally, very occasionally, as it's happened once or twice, we do occasionally sort of meet farmers who go, well, what happens if we just say no? What happens if we do nothing? So I suppose we could talk about that at a farmer point of view, and we'll certainly ask the farmers what they think. What do they think is the consequence of inaction? Because it'd be interesting to see their point, because I think quite a few of them would actually think it's a terribly bad thing to do. But I suppose collectively then, if all of us as a supply chain, if we just do nothing, what's the worst that's going to happen in the short term, do you think?
But it depends what timescale you put. The worst case scenario is we you know, as a food business, we run out of food. So if we don't make our supply chain pretty brutal, right? And not just for food, but it's pretty bad for society as a whole. At last time, we kind of need food to survive. So you know that's, you know, it sounds very kind of existential and calamitous, and that's because it is, right? If we don't solve some of these issues, if we don't find a way of either mitigating the impact we're having on the world around us, or find a way to be resilient against it, we're not going to grow crops anymore. So when it's too hot in the Mediterranean to grow olives and peppers and tomatoes, etc. So where do they grow? Scotland. Well, last time I looked, Scotland wasn't set up for growing kind of, you know, peppers and cucumbers, etc., etc. And then when do the potatoes get grown? Do they go to Iceland? Well, that's great until the volcanoes erupt. So there's challenges around all this. If we don't get our heads around this, it's going to cause, you know, if you're just talking about the food sector, and that's going to be calamitous for organisations or growers that are reliant on one crop. So will they all, you know, the supermarkets aren't going to run out of food overnight. But if there's a failure in a particular crop that you are so reliant upon, and it could be something minor, and most of us in the food sector have seen some kind of supply chain crisis driven by, you know, logistics over the last 4 or 5 years, and we don't actually realise, for example, how critical CO2 was to our business, and until one of the CO2 production plants in Europe shut down, and it's used for everything from, you know, from stunning animals to you know, food freshness to soft drinks, right, and to cooling in fridges. So if we've got no CO2, that could cause a big issue. That wasn't on our risk list back 5 years ago. It is now. If there's a massive issue with yeast, we can't make our dough, which is a problem. So it's not necessarily, even if the flour is fine, if yeast is an issue, we're out of business. So it doesn't take much of a stretch of imagination to think, okay, if there's a climate related risk to a particular crop that's critical, what does that do for certain brands? What does it do to certain farming communities? What's it do to the wider food supply chain? It can be catastrophic. So it's absolutely in our own selfish interest to sort this stuff out.
So even basically what we're saying is even short-term inaction is absolutely just going to increase our risk significantly. I mean, to the point where it becomes just ever more intolerant.
Yeah, I'm sure there's farmers all over the UK that have had issues with droughts and floods in the last couple of years, and some of that has to be down to soil quality. If you're not looking after your soil correctly, you are limiting and putting at risk your ability to grow, right?
Yeah, potentially.
Now I'll find another farm to get my product from, but for that particular farm, that's a problem. When it happens to half the farms in the country, I'm out of product. It's a problem for me.
Yes, and I see what you mean. And for some of them that are in the best place, maybe it could be comfortable for them not to do anything. But basically, what you're saying is inaction across the board is eventually it's going to catch up with everyone.
Yeah.
Well, the environment that we're working in is changing. So if we don't change, then we are not setting ourselves up to be able to continue to trade, to farm, to whatever it is, because we have to change at least as fast as the environment continues to change just to keep up and stay where we are. If we don't do anything, we go backwards, and we want to be changing more quickly the environment so we can go in a positive direction. So I think there's not really an option in my mind of doing nothing, because we're not in a world or an environment that allows us to continue doing what we've been doing.
Yeah, I agree.
We've got to change.
I'd always flip it and say, what's the downside to taking action? If the whole world was at the stage where the stuff they're doing is really difficult and expensive, I'd get it. We're not there yet, right? Lots of the stuff that still needs to be done is relatively simple, relatively quick to do, and relatively cheap. So there's no downside to doing some of this stuff, because it makes you more profitable, makes you more resilient, gives you more customers to sell stuff to. The downside of inaction is much worse than doing something.
And that's probably then a great segue into some conversations with some of our other guests and bits and pieces about the peculiarity of sort of human resistance to change. I mean, I remember having a conversation with somebody about technology and innovation, and they said, that the only thing that matches sort of the world's appetite for technology and innovation is their fear of change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's how can you have two things that are so intrinsically linked, but then at the same time are almost oxymorons of each other. But it's and that's obviously where we get into these points. I mean, we're having conversations as human beings, hopefully being listened to by human beings, and obviously we have to be aware of all of the complexities, nuances, and quirks of being human beings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's now as queer as folk.
Absolutely.
And none of us are immune to it. Right? I mean, I sit with in our business, we make decisions every single day. Some are easy decisions because there's no downside, and some decisions are really difficult because they require huge investments of time or effort or people or money, none of which we have in abundance. So you've got to make sure you get the decisions correct. If you get them wrong, you've wasted time you don't have, people's resources you don't have, money you certainly don't have. So I get some changes really difficult because it requires quite a lot of very brave long-term thinking. All I'm saying is some stuff doesn't. Some stuff is actually it doesn't require a big leap of faith.
What would be your short and medium term goals to try and overcome the immediate barrier of sort of we're not making enough progress? Or what would be your hopes that any company coming to the table, sort of new and excited to sort of make a difference, what would be your sort of first couple of things you'd ask them to do, and then that that medium term target?
I think for me, it's typically it would be the head of sustainability that is our kind of point of contact, and would be signing the business up. So for the fact that we can then, there's kind of one big green flag that we know things are working are when we see more and more people from that business joining our events, inquiring about upskilling, and becoming kind of regular participants in the conversation. It's something we talk about as a team all the time, like how can we track our impact and that ripple effect beyond, don't know. We can only go by how many people are coming to our events, how many people are engaging, have we got repeat users, and is word spreading. I've got a big focus, and again, it's a big, talking about green flags, not red flags. When we are given permission or we are asked to come and upskill a board, that's massive, because actually it's the business leaders, the C-suite, the board, whatever you call them. They are ultimately the ones that set the culture, set the direction of travel and the pace and the ambition around these issues. And if we can get in front of a board, if we can work with them to kind of challenge their thinking, and actually theirs is about mindset shift. They're incredibly smart business people, because they wouldn't be running the business otherwise. That's where a lot of the magic can happen. And actually that's when they will then give people like Ben permission to do it. And that's when things fly. That's kind of the short term, is to get the employee almost advocacy and colleagues using it and building new connections. But then it's going to the senior leaders to get that mindset shift in, I would say.
So Ben, that is podcast 1 nearly come to an end. I personally have learned a lot from just hearing from Leprino customers and the supporters sort of over the last little while, in terms of where they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and in some instances how they're doing it. So maybe your thoughts, some of your key take-home messages?
Yeah, no, definitely. They were a grand bunch, and definitely some of our customers we're closer to, so that helps. And for context, I think both of those customers are pretty advanced in their journey, so not everybody is in the same position. But obviously it gives you a sort of an overview, and there were probably 3 or 4 big sort of take homes there, wasn't it? And the first one, and probably the one that's most important, particularly for any sort of primary producers that are listening, is there is a recognition that the current system needs to strive for a greater balance economically. And I think when we look at sort of the barriers to change, which I know is really sort of the 6th episode in this podcast series, there are sort of 3 big systemic barriers. One of them, the most obvious one that you can't avoid talking about, is economics. It's about sort of who's getting paid for doing what, and is it just, and is it sort of fair and equitable. And I think Steve made out the point there, that recognizing that sort of a 35p, pulling a number out of the air, that's sort of roughly where this sat when we were talking, a 35p milk price isn't working for the farmer at the moment, and that's something that we need to look at. At the same time, the 50p milk price that we saw in those highs at the end of 2022, that nearly killed the supply chain. And some of the reasons that those businesses are struggling now is historical because of that. And as Steve pointed out, there must be somewhere in the middle. And actually, that's something that we have to collectively strive for going forwards. To hear that from a customer, I think it was great for us to hear. But it should be reassuring to farmers. There are businesses that are sort of recognizing this and are trying to shift their buying models to sort of reward for sustainability. But then we obviously heard that this has come hard and fast. It's not driven by customer. I mean, that was quite an interesting thing to pick up with sort of everybody on the call. I think Kate made a point that sort of they are coming though. We can't underestimate the impact of the customer when they come. And a lot of the companies who are trying to do the right thing, and obviously Steve again and Marika talked about the morals and the ethics of this. The companies are trying to do the right thing is because customers expect it. I think Marika in particular has pointed out, this is an expectation. This is a business necessity. Therefore, we have to do it. But that obviously, and I mean Marika and Steve as well pointed out that this is driven by investor and legislative pressure. So it's one of those, as a supply chain, we have to change and adapt, because if we don't, we lose that market. We can't supply customers with cheese if they can't sell cheese, because it's not deemed as sustainable, not necessarily by the consumer, but by those that are funding their business growth or support. That means the change is going to be fast as well. I mean, that's the interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, all of both of those companies, and it's probably worth pointing out then that both those companies talked about their SBTI targets, their science-based targets, which is that glide path based on actual scientific evidence, not some global conspiracy theory. And they're not the only ones. I think almost all of our customers, certainly our UK customers, but the large chunk of our European customers have either a commitment to SBTI or have verified or moving towards verified SBTI targets. So inevitable. That's what we got from this. Change is inevitable, but there are people in the supply chain that want to make it fair.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the one thing that I know Kate pointed out, and I think Marika did as well, was that cultural change as well. So it's not just about doing things differently. It's about having the culture, and then from an internal point of view and from an external point of view, that that culture change needs to be driven as well, and that will create that sustained physical change or activity change, as well as that culture changes as well, which I thought was a great point to be made.
And I think the bit, almost sort of the ask then from those individuals that had come on the call, the ask from them was, we need help actually, and that really, to speak about Kate's purpose, is help in education. I think there was a recognition, certainly in those businesses, and that might not be true across everybody, but in those businesses there was a recognition they didn't know it all. In fact, actually, I think Steve and Keris were quite clear that they knew relatively little, but had a huge appetite to learn what needed to be done, and made no secret that they're still relatively early on in that journey. So I think their request was, if farmers are happy to help educate them, then things may well change. So I suppose it's an invitation to dialogue, which is refreshing.
Yeah, no, absolutely refreshing, and that they don't have all the answers. They need support in doing it. They need help, but also they need everyone in their supply chain to be engaged with them. And that's no mean feat, as we all know. Just because we share knowledge does not mean people engage. And that's, I think, one of the barriers that we're at right now.
As ever, a huge thanks to everyone who's taken the time to be involved in this podcast. It really has been another great episode that we've been able to deliver. So we hope you've enjoyed listening to it. If you are enjoying the series, then please make sure that you subscribe to the Let's Talk Agri-Tech podcast. And you can do that on all of your favourite listening apps. And you can also listen back either through the listening apps or on the UK Agri-Tech Centre website. Make sure you subscribe, and then the next episode will be notified to you so that you don't miss out. But look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye all.